Anastasia Bale got out of the carriage and ordered the poor man to escort her. He replied that he worked like a dog to track her down. The man was very interested and asked why she needed it. The guy put a sword on his shoulder and ordered him to keep his mouth shut and show the way. "Here she is!" The poor man pointed to a little girl who was playing with a piece of wood and a peg sitting on the ground near the house in the rain. "The lady can't even imagine how much effort it took me to track her down. The one who calls herself her mother protects her well," the poor man cried. They threw a bag at his feet. There was a lot of gold there and the man was happy about it. For this, he had to take all the information with him to the grave. The girl was very beautiful with golden curly hair. Beautiful camellia, a flower among the mud. A gem born in a brothel. Anastasia approached her and asked the girl what she was doing here, and all alone in the rain. The girl replied that her mother was busy for now. This brought a smile to the woman's face, and she asked the girl, "You must be Leah, right?" The girl was surprised that the woman knew her name. Then Anastasia told her the story. One day, a pregnant girl of incredible beauty came here in search of refuge. Having no roof over her head, she knocked on every door, begging for a piece of bread. She slept among criminals and homeless people, and was always afraid that she was being followed. A few months later, she gave birth to a baby right on the street. Not like all the rot of the slums, an angel with emerald eyes and golden hair. When winter came, the child fell ill from the unforgiving cold and was penniless. For the first time in her entire life, his mother sold her body to the town doctor. And so 12 years later, Anastasia told the girl that her mother was terminally ill. The little girl was very scared and ran towards the house. Anastasia's servant grabbed her and took her in his arms. She was too light for a 12-year-old girl. He told the lady about this. And Anastasia replied that there was no time to talk now, and she ordered him to take people and clean up here. The guy asked, "So what happened to her mom?" And the lady replied, "What do you think? What happens to fire when it rains?" And she really hoped that the girl's mother would not survive. And they left, taking Leah. What a pleasant smell, so soft. "Am I in heaven?" thought the little girl. And suddenly she jumped up on the bed, opening her eyes. She was in a luxurious room on a huge, soft bed. The girl was scared when she saw the maid, and I asked her if they were in heaven. The girl smiled and said that she must be very hungry. The food on the tray looked very appetizing. But the girl did not eat. She was very worried about her mother. She asked the maid what was wrong with her mother. The girl said that her beautiful aunt told her that her mother was sick, and she wanted to know what was wrong with her. She also didn't know where they were now. The maid thought that the girl was not hungry since she did not eat. But this was not so. She was just very worried about her mother. And then she asked where that beautiful aunt was. The girl replied that the lady would come as soon as the girl had eaten and bought herself. Leah didn't understand why she needed to swim, but in fact, a terrible stench emanated from her. Suddenly, the door to the room opened and a blonde boy ran into it. He scolded the maid for not calling him as soon as Leah woke up. The boy greeted Camellia and sat down next to her on the bed. He introduced himself as Kieran Bale. Leah cowered in fear. Kieran asked not to be afraid of him, because he turns 15 this year and is only 3 years older than her. Leah curled up into a ball and was still shaking. She asked to let her go to her mother because she didn't even warn her and she would be very worried. The guy understood her sadness. "You must miss her a lot," he asked Leah. Then Kieran asked the maid Betty where Leah's mother was. Betty sighed sadly, but she said that the madam would inform them about this, and her task was only to feed and bathe Leah. Then the girl remembered that she needed to take a bath. She felt embarrassed to be so dirty in front of Kieran. He was so beautiful and clean. And Betty then offered her something to eat after the bath. She was very kind to the girl, and Betty promised to help her with everything when Leah said she didn't know how to bathe. Suddenly, Kieran coughed and stained Leah's bed with blood. The girl was scared, and Betty screamed to call the doctor. Leah asked her if he would die. Betty didn't expect such a question, but answered that he would be fine. He probably just walked a lot in the rain. And they went to the bathroom. After bathing and changing clothes, the girl and Betty approached the mistress's room. Upon entering, Leah said hello and thanked her for the food. The lady noted that the girl looked much better after tidying herself up, but Leah still asked to see her mother. Then Mrs. Anastasia asked her to come to her. When Leah sat down next to her, the lady said that the girl would no longer be able to see her mother. After all, she committed a crime and stole something very expensive and very important to her that could never be returned. The girl did not believe it, and tears flowed from her eyes. Leah said she would find the item, maybe it just got lost. After all, her mother is not a thief. Then Anastasia called Betty. The maid brought her a box of scissors. The mistress said that from now on Leah is Camelius Bale, and cut off her beautiful hair. When Leah objected, Anastasia said, "If you vow to live like Camelius from today, I promise that nothing will happen to you and your mother." As Leah sat on her bed and cried, Betty said that her mother would not be punished, she would just get treatment. And the lady is not as evil as she might think. But the girl must learn to obey. After all, this is the only way to save Laura. Leah turned around and asked if Betty knew her mother. The maid replied that of course she knew. "After all, this is your father's house," Betty said, and showed Leah to his portrait on the wall. They were very similar to him. Hair, eyes. And she remembered her mother's words standing in front of the mirror. "Camelia, from your father you got beautiful light honey hair and bewitching emerald eyes." "You are his copy," Mom always said. Leah looked at her reflection in the glass cabinet and had only one question in her head. "Mom, what's going on?" The maids worked near the palace. They discussed the child who had arrived with the mistress. They say that he is the illegitimate son of the Marquis. But why would the lady bring him into the house? After all, she already has a son, Mr. Kieran. But in secret, Mr. Kieran is ill, and if the aristocrats find out about this, they will take up arms against the Bale house. She makes it clear to them that even if something happens to Kieran, the House of Bale will still be as powerful in the hands of another successor. When the maids saw Camelius with Betty on the street, everyone noticed his complete resemblance to Kieran. But only they had a question whether it was a boy. Leah complained to Betty that she couldn't remember the road on such a huge territory of the palace, calling it a meme. But Betty scolded him for this treatment. She is just a servant for him. And now he is Bale, the son of the Marquis Gillard, and must learn to behave like an aristocrat. His lessons will take place in Mr. Kieran's room. Then Leah asked Betty if she thought her mistress would let her go home to her mother, if she did everything as they said. Betty replied that the lady was a man of her word, and the Marquis will return soon. He has sorted out the work in the north, and he is already looking forward to seeing him, Camelius Bale. Leah was also interested. This place was very different from the slums. It was very beautiful here. But the beautiful silence was broken by shots, and Leah noticed a handsome guy with dark hair. "Elias, finally you left the room. You can't imagine how worried I was." Kieran suddenly shouted and rushed to hug his new brother. Kieran introduced Elias as his little brother to that tall guy, Claude. Claude motioned for Elias to cover his ears and shoot into the sky at the birds. The subtle aroma of lavender was overwhelmed by the pungent smell of gunpowder. "This place is full of beautiful but deadly things," Leah thought. "I see you are not at all worried by the sudden appearance of your brother," Claude asked Kieran, who was playing with a real gun in the room. When the guy asked if he should be alarmed, Claude replied that his brother was proof of his father's deception. Kieran responded by saying that deception has its price, and his brother Elias has already sacrificed a lot for this. In general, he was glad that he now had a younger brother, and Claude has nothing to worry about. Two brothers, they were so similar but completely different at heart, and yet they looked like two peas in a pod, Claude thought, watching Elias play in the yard from the window of the room. During lunch, Kieran told his brother that he should eat more. Otherwise, he had lost a lot of weight. He sincerely worried about him. Mrs. Anastasia asked Elias how his classes were going. If he studies well, he will be the best in the academy, just like his brother Kieran. Kieran told his mother that it had only been a week since classes started and Elias was working hard. And in recent days, he had slept little due to the constant shooting of Mr. Claude. When Mrs. Anastasia went to her room, Kieran told about Claude. They met at the academy. Claude is the heir to the House of Ihar, Guardians of the North. Even though they are the same age and study together at the academy, he shows himself in many ways. Leah thought he was so mesmerizing but scary at the same time. Kieran offered to go hunting with them next time. Leah said that he never even held a musket. "Brother, you have to start somewhere." Leah thought her brother was too cute. Suddenly, the door opened, a maid ran in and announced that the Marquis had returned. Kieran was very happy about this. The Marquis got out of the carriage and hugged his wife. The boys came out to meet him. Kieran hugged his father, and Leah thought it must be her father. He called the boy to him, looked into his eyes, hugged him tightly, and said, "Welcome home, Camelius." "I heard it was a girl." "We don't need a girl. Do you think a girl can behave like a boy?" the Marquise asked his wife. She told him that this was not forever, only until Kieran recovered, and she asked to think of her as a means of maintaining the reputation of the house. The guy said it was heartless of her to make the girls suffer for the sake of their reputation. Anastasia replied that he is heartless here. After all, it was he who shared the bed with the maid. She then thought that this was a temporary hobby that would quickly get boring. But then with Kieran's first steps, her belly also began to grow. The whole house and all the servants followed her orders in case she gave birth to a boy. The day Kieran fell, it was as if the heavens had fallen. The Marquis kicked the girl out of the palace, and since then their son has been suffering. Anastasia will never be able to forget about this. The Marquis asked what happened to Leah's mother. Anastasia replied that she was probably dead or crazy. Her husband said that she was pushing herself too hard. Kieran may be weak, but no one would dare look down on House Bale. Anastasia replied that this was her son and she would not stand aside and watch. Anastasia said that she dreams about the woman responsible for Kieran's condition from time to time. It's hard to bear. And his wife asked him not to forget what she had done. Gilliard swore to the House of Bale that he would never forgive her. When Anastasia's friends and girls Leah's age gathered together, they were all in love with Claude. One of them noticed that he was looking at someone. The girls asked Anastasia who it was, catching snow with his mouth on the street, and she told the maid to take Laius to his chambers, since the street was still too dangerous for him. Her friends realized that this was the mistress's son who was being treated in isolation, and one of the girls asked the lady, "Is he really a boy?" Anastasia shuddered at the unexpected question, but the girl said that he was just so handsome that everyone probably confuses him with a girl. "Brother, it's time for me to go to class," Laius shouted, breaking free. "You're wrong, Master Theodore arrives tomorrow morning," Kieran answered him. "And now Mr. Claude will teach you to shoot," Kieran said and pulled him by the hand. Claude was already standing, taking aim, with a gun. Claude noticed Laius and asked him why he was trying the snow then. Laius replied that he was just curious. Then Claude gave him a gun and helped him aim. Suddenly, after the shot, the servants shouted that Monsieur Claude was wounded and they needed to call a doctor. The guy replied that everything was fine. He just burned his hand on the barrel of the gun. Laius cried because Claude got burned. The guy was surprised by this reaction. Then he asked the boy why he was crying because it was not him who was hurt. And Laius just silently rolled a snowball and put it on his burnt hand. Tears flowed down his cheeks and the snow melted and flowed from Claude's hand. The thoughts in the kid's head were that he had injured the nobleman. What will he do to him for this? Hit him, flog him, or maybe execute him? What will Mrs. Anastasia say? He asked for forgiveness and mentally asked his mother to help. A girl ran up and, pushing Laius away, offered her help to Claude and gave her a handkerchief. The girl yelled at the boy for hurting Mr. Claude and how dangerous it was. Kieran stood up for his brother for raising her voice. Kieran suggested that Laius ask Mr. Claude for forgiveness. When he did this, Claude threw the handkerchief into the snow and asked him to do it again. Laius didn't understand whether he needed to apologize again, and Claude smiled and told him to apply the snow again, because it helps much more than a scarf. Mistress Anastasia hit Laius on the cheek so hard that he fell to the floor. She screamed that he had forgotten his role to simply exist. And not to suck up to the prince and Mr. Claude, thinking that if they like you, you can be whoever you want. If you involve Kieran in something like this again, I will not be so merciful. Your task is just to live. The lady finished. What a show, thought Claude, walking past the room along the corridor. He stood there for a moment thinking and walked away. Luce sat outside in the snow under the starry sky and cried, remembering his mother. Suddenly Claude came up to him, rolled a snowball and applied it to his tears. When Laius asked what he was doing, Claude replied, "So what does it feel like?" shook the snow off his hands and left. The kid sat there, not understanding what it was. "If you want to raise her like a boy, then you must respect her, Anastasia," the Marquise told his wife. He shamed her for hitting their child. Anastasia said that she would not have to punish him if he did not make mistakes, and she would have done the same to Kieran if he had disgraced their name. Gilliard asked if Laius had disgraced their name, and she replied that weakness begets weakness when mistakes get away with, and someone else is disgracing their family. With these words, the Marquis slammed the door. Walking down the corridor, he asked the servant how things were going with the search for Leah's mother. He was told that she had left lower. Some say that she is obsessed with finding her daughter, while others say that she is simply left without money. The Marquis replied that there was no need to report gossip, and he told the servant that it turned out that they had found a diamond mine in the neutral territory of the north, and if not for the intervention of the emperor, the land would already have belonged to Duke Ihar. The servant replied that in this case, a war would begin. Gilead continued that conspirators were already gathering around Gaior. Levin Sergio, king of Gaior. If they help him in Del Casa, then he will be indebted to them. Their conversation was interrupted by the news that Kieran was in trouble. A mother cried over her sick son's bed. Gilead asked the doctor to report on the situation. He said that the treatment did not bring any results. Anastasia screamed to find another medicine, and the doctor replied that the best doctors in the empire were working on the treatment, but the boy's lungs were gradually failing. Claude suggested sending him to the neutral territory of the north, to Gaior. There is a doctor there named Schmidt. They call him the Almighty Healer. Gilead said that Gaior bordered Del Casa to the south, and he and Kieran could go north to look for Schmidt. And Claude said that Schmidt is the court physician of Sergio's house, and besides, he owed it to his father. Claude also felt very sorry for Kieran. When Claude left Kieran's room, he noticed Leah standing in the hallway. The guy thought it was very strange that he couldn't visit his brother without permission. Lius bowed when he saw Claude, and he passed by, stopped and asked how old he was. Lius wondered why he did this, but answered that it was 12. Claude asked if he went to the academy, and he replied that he had private lessons. Then Claude said that they would meet in 4 years at the academy. 4 years later, Leah was beautiful, but she was still Lius. Her chest was bandaged. She was 16. Betty reminded Leah that it was time for her to get her hair cut. Her hair grew longer during her mistress's absence, and when the mistress returns, she will punish everyone for this. All the castle servants paid attention to Leah. Betty said they were just jealous of her beauty. Leah was also wondering how Kieran was doing. 4 winters have passed since Kieran left for the north in search of treatment. King Gaiora invited him to study in the north throughout his treatment. Gilead was furious. He could not come to terms with the fact that his son was being held hostage, and Anastasia was merciless and forbade Leah to communicate with her brother and Claude. Leah hoped Kieran would recover before he came back and she could move back in with her mum. The servant told Lius that they had come to him from the academy. The guests asked Gilead to send his youngest son to the academy. He replied that his wife, who is now away, is taking care of the children's education. The man informed the Marquis that House Ilhar hoped to see Camillus at the academy as soon as possible. Claude wants to see me? Camillus thought. The father replied that then he would need a room and a servant. The professor replied that they would provide him with a room, and the presence of servants was contrary to the rules of the academy. Master Theodore said that Lius had already surpassed his graduates. This was another reason to nurture this talent at the academy. When Lius heard the professor's words that his father would be able to visit him in the capital, he began to beg his father to let him go to the academy. The boy promised to study well and not disgrace the Bale House. Then the father agreed and promised to discuss with Anastasia his training and housing near the academy. Leah ran along the road excitedly, thinking that her mother was somewhere in the capital and that she would soon be able to find her. I wonder if she's bored. Has she forgotten about her daughter? She certainly never would have thought that her daughter would become part of the Bale House. Mom always smiled when they were together, and they never had secrets from each other. It was good with Mom. You could talk about everything and didn't have to hide. Leah decided that the academy in the capital was her chance to return to her past life. Suddenly, Camillus was called out by a man. He was from the academy. He insinuated that Lius was, in fact, the wrong gender, and he warned that people might not be as kind to people like him. Pippi, Leah's maid, was very worried that Lius would leave for the capital without her. He reassured her that his parents would definitely not let him go without her. Pippi was happy. Lius invited Pippi to choose an outfit for him in the capital. She was glad because she had dreamed about this for a long time, and Leah herself thought only that she would find her mother in the capital. A few days later, Leah saw the imperial capital of Ether from a carriage window. His father asked him if it was true that he had never left Lower. He replied that my mother said it was too dangerous there. She was right, the capital was not famous for its safety, but Dad said that with the right company, it is full of delight. Gilead told Lius that the imperial tailor worked in this building, and he had been asked to work on its uniform. They were about to go in when suddenly the prince, Wade von Weise, called out to them. He hugged Lius and said that his father couldn't wait to see him. Leos was very surprised by this but told his father that everything was fine. And the prince sees him off. Wade joked that it's been 4 years and he's still just as skinny. The last time they saw each other was when Claude got burned by a gun because of him. Wade said that at the academy everyone only talks about Leos and he is now famous. Then Leos became interested in what exactly they were saying about him. And Wade replied that the younger Bale, who had never been seen in public, had finally appeared in the capital. In any case, Leos was a wonderful child according to the prince, but now, to his surprise, he has become very feminine. When they entered the tailor's room, he had a client and he said that he was busy now, since His Majesty had not made an appointment. Wade sat down on the sofa. He said he was just bringing a lost client to him. Then he turned to Leos to see who was at the tailor. It was Claude. Buttoning up his shirt, he told Leos that he hadn't changed at all. And looking into his eyes, he whispered, "Hello, Camillus." When the tailor took Lewis's measurements, Claude was still sitting on the sofa. The tailor asked Leos to undress so that the measurements could be more accurate. Leah asked for a screen, and when she took off her clothes, the tailor realized that there was a girl in front of him. He offered her another shirt that would hide everything she needed. When Camillus came out from behind the screen, the prince immediately invited him to visit him. Leah had only one question in her head. When will this all end? Claude and Wade mounted their horses. Leos sat with Claude, and the prince did not like it very much. Claude said it was for his safety because the prince was a bad horseman. Leos saw the imperial palace for the first time, and when he was invited to the imperial banquet, he said that this place was too wonderful for him. Claude said to this that Mr. Leos is still a flatterer, and His Majesty is too gullible. This offended Leos very much, and Wade said that was great. After all, he loves people who admire him. Then Claude blocked the prince's path and asked him to control himself. Claude reminded him that this had already happened to the son of the Earl of Sheringham, and what it led to. Wade then asked if he thought he had seduced the younger Sheringham. To this, Claude replied that it was better to be careful, so that there were no misunderstandings. And then there's the fact that Camillus is too beautiful for his own good. Wade asked Camillus not to take everything to heart, since Claude only wanted to hurt him. And Leos told Claude that he was not a flatterer. But he simply always tries to be reasonable no matter where he is and with whom, and without benefiting from it. And thanking Monsieur Claude, Leos ran away to the palace. The next day, while having breakfast in the same campaign, the prince asked Leos if he had a bride in mind to marry. To this he replied that his brother should marry first, and the prince announced that Kieran would marry his sister. Leos was sad that he would not be invited to his brother's wedding. Claude told Wade that Mistress Anastasia had not returned yet, and therefore he did not know about his brother's wedding. Leos was grateful for his support, and looking into Leos's eyes, Claude said, "I look forward to the day when we get closer, Camillus Bale. I'm looking forward to it." When Camillus left, Claude asked the prince about him. Claude hinted that he seemed to like Leos, to which Wade replied it doesn't matter whether they are men or women, as long as they are beautiful, he will have them. That's why he liked Claude and Kieran. Wade said that Leos could become Kieran's replacement in society, but in the end, he would still become his property. While the friends were going to the banquet, the prince said that he had already refused many girls, and it seemed that His Majesty was seriously aiming to find him a wife. Claude asked what about the Marquise Shelby's daughter, but Wade was outraged that it was intended for Claude, and everyone knows about their engagement. Claude became upset when he remembered the engagement. Leos had a stomachache and was allowed not to go to the banquet and stay at home. Then Leah took off her uncomfortable clothes and stayed in her shirt. She took a jar of sweets and sat on the window to watch the starry sky and breathe fresh air. Leah thought that her mother was somewhere there, outside the castle walls. She really wanted to see her and was wondering if her mother would recognize her. But suddenly, she heard a conversation. The voices were very familiar to her. "I heard that Princess Rosina and Mr. Kieran are due to get engaged next month. We should be next, what do you think?" It was Marilyn Shelby's voice. Claude told her that her father would benefit more if she became engaged to someone who was truly ready for marriage. The girl asked if he was joking. To this, the guy replied that there are enough good men in the Empire, and most of them are ready to kill just for one glance. But Marilyn replied that none of them could compare with him. She thanked him for his company and said that she would wait for the next dance with him and left. Watching this, Leos felt embarrassed and wanted to hide and close the window, but the candies spilled out of the jar and fell right on Claude. Leos got scared and closed the window. He thought that Claude would not look for his room and enter him. He was embarrassed by what he heard, but it happened by accident. He also dropped candy on him. Claude entered Lius's room and asked if he really thought he wouldn't find him. Claude asked why he eats sweets if his stomach hurts. Lius said he needed to eat some sweets to overcome the taste of the medicine. Then Claude asked him to come and sit next to him on the sofa. Leah didn't want to approach because she was afraid that he had noticed something. Claude still insisted that he come over and say that he wanted to check something. All he wanted to say was that it was better to be careful with Prince Wade. The prince is a connoisseur of beauty, and he doesn't care who's in front of him. Men, women, nobles, or peasants, these words mean nothing to him. Don't smile too much around him and keep your distance, Claude told Lius. Your voice is too charming, it can further stir up the prince's interest, Claude continued, to which Lius asked if he was jealous. Leah herself didn't understand how she asked, "If the prince likes everything beautiful, then why don't you worry about yourself, Monsieur Claude?" "And why?" asked Claude. "Because you are the most beautiful person I have ever seen," Leah said and quickly ran away, saying that she was just about to take a shower. Claude sat thoughtfully and then asked, "You made me your little toy, didn't you?" Finding Leah's shirt, he inhaled the scent of lavender. Snow in spring. After 4 years, Kieran never got used to it. Sitting in the room with him was his friend Ian Sergio, the third prince of Gyora. Kieran wrote a letter and asked Ian to deliver it. The prince was surprised why the guy didn't ask his mother to deliver him to Leah, because she was going there. The guy replied that he had already sent letters to Leah many times, but had never received answers to them. Ian realized that Mrs. Anastasia did not want him and his sister to communicate. Then the prince remembered how Kieran had often boasted about his sister, who was as beautiful as an angel. Therefore, he agreed to deliver the letter to her personally. Kieran wanted to warn him that things were not so simple with Leah, but Ian ran away too quickly, and his mother came into his room. She realized that he had a prince. Madame Anastasia said that it was certainly good that she and the prince had become friends, but we should not forget that Ian was from an enemy family, and you shouldn't get too close to him. Then Kieran decided to go to the library. The lady was offended that lately he had been avoiding her more and more often. The guy replied that he was just looking forward to returning home. A few days later, at the palace, Lius and Pippi asked Betty to go to town. She warned them that on the streets of Ether, attacks on women, especially noble women, had become more frequent. And although Lius is a guy, at first glance he can still be mistaken for a girl. But Lius and Pippi did not listen to her, but were already running to the carriage. The girl's mother begged Prince Wade to punish the criminal who attacked Marilyn. He said that the emperor had personally instructed the Imperial Guard to hunt down the culprit. When Wade and Claude went outside, they discussed how the criminal really only attacks noble girls. There are clues that indicate he is part of a revolutionary faction that wants to end the empire. This means he will be apprehended quickly. Claude told Wade that his job was to keep Marilyn company. The prince was again indignant that this was not his beloved. Then Claude said goodbye and left. Driving through the city in a car, Claude noticed Lius and remembered how he spilled candy on him. And Leah also noticed him, freezing in place. Phoebe was happy to be here in the store with Lius. She thought that they had come for a fountain pen that the gentleman liked. But Leah surprised her by saying that she needed a dress. Pippi promised to choose the best dress for the beautiful Leah. Leah decided to buy 5 dresses. When Leah, still pretending to be Lius, was looking at the hats, someone called her Camellia. She saw a guy in a white uniform and told him that he was mistaken. But he was sure that this was Kieran Bale's sister. Lius insisted that he was mistaken, but the guy was struck by their similarity. Then Lius asked who he was, and the guy replied that he was her friend and wanted to join her over a portion of luxurious fruit sorbet. Lius agreed. When they were sitting in the cafe, the prince felt stuffy and wanted to sit on the terrace. But Lius objected since his clothes with the Gyora banner were too conspicuous. Ian replied that his clothes were conspicuous, obviously not as much as pretending to be a man. Lius protested that he was really a man, and Lius asked how his brother was doing there and how he was feeling. Ian replied that it was good, but he had been waiting for news from his sister for a long time. As it turned out, his relative did not answer a single letter. Lius was surprised because he had never received letters from his brother. Ian said he knew they weren't delivered. But Kieran wrote to his dear sister every month. But he never received any answers from her. That's why he asked for help. "The only way to make me leave is to stop pretending, Camellia," said the prince. but Laius insisted that his name was Camillus. Then Ian said that Kieran would soon return to Korsor, and he would be able to return the long-awaited answer to him personally. And he gave him the envelope in his hands. Leah held the envelope in her hands and wondered what would happen to her if her brother recovered and returned home. Will she return to Camelia's life? Mr. Ian really liked Leah and asked permission to invite her to Geor. He really hoped to meet her at home like Camelia, and kissed her hand. Sitting over the response letter, Leah wondered where to start. Betty asked why she bought 5 dresses for Pee-Pee. I also ate dessert with a foreigner. Betty was worried. Because you need to be more careful with strangers, and even more so after a criminal appeared who attacked Marilyn Shelby. Leah decided to take a moment and ask how Mrs. Anastasia found her then, 4 years ago. After all, the capital is so big she couldn't have found it by chance. Betty replied that one of the servants had met Laura before. Leah asked who exactly, and Betty said that the lady sent him away. Then Leah asked why this happened to her. Betty replied that the lady was always concerned about Kieran's poor health and that fingers were pointed at him, and everyone around was discussing other possible heirs. Relatives began to put pressure on the lady to adopt one of their sons, but she knew that then her son would not survive even if he recovered. After all, their plans were clear. This is what brought her to Leah. Leah admitted to Betty that Kieran would soon return and she would no longer be needed. And then she will go in search of her mother. When Leah was again swimming in her clothes in the pool, she thought about the fact that she so wanted to get out of here. But at the same time, something was holding her here. Lying on her back in the water, she noticed someone's gaze on her. It was Claude. He sat near the pool and did not take his eyes off her. Then Laius came out of the water and asked Claude what he was doing here. He said that he mixed up the dates when Kieran arrives. But in fact, he knew that it was not today. And so Claude took off his shirt and said that he wanted to swim with Laius and this would be their first swim together. Laius wanted to leave, but Claude grabbed his hand and pulled him into the water. Coming out of the water, Leah was worried that he might see something through her wet shirt, and she wrapped herself in a towel. Claude lay down on a mat on the grass and invited Laius to sit next to him. Laius sat down next to him but said he could come in if he wanted to take a nap. Claude asked him to stay. The guy asked what Laius plans to do when Kieran returns. After all, the first heir gets everything and the rest nothing. Laius replied that he already had some plans for the future, and Claude offered to be his butler at the court of Ihar. This was an important leadership position. Leah was surprised by this proposal, because she thought that he hated her. But Laius told him that he would do what he wanted, and money was not important to him. Then Claude said not to talk nonsense and asked him to wake him up in an hour, not the servants. Leah admired him with his eyes closed. When Claude fell asleep, Leah stroked his hair and thought that with each such moment it would be more and more difficult for her to leave this place. It was late at night when Leah woke up in her bed. She called Pippi and asked what she was doing here. After all, she was on the street. Pippi replied that Leah fell asleep on the street and Mr. Claude had to carry her into the room in his arms. Pippi was very surprised by this, as was Leah herself. When Leah asked where he was, Pippi replied that he had already returned to the capital. And Pippi took Leah to bathe with new shampoos. The new shampoos smelled simply wonderful. Leah asked Pippi if she was heavy. Pippi replied that she was as light as a feather, and even lighter than she should be. Leah was worried that she had caused Mr. Claude a lot of inconvenience, and she is sure that next time he will say that she is too skinny for a man. To this, Pippi replied that she was worried about something else. After all, Leah has grown up and now it will be increasingly difficult to convince others that she is a man. Pippi asked how long she was going to hide because Mr. Kieran was already feeling better. Leah yelled at her that she was already going beyond the limits. But in fact, I thought that Pippi was right. And she remembered the words of Prince Ian, who soon wanted to see her as a guest, like Camelia. Camelia decided that if she wants to find her mother and get her life back, then she must make sure that these two, Ian and Claude, do not expose her. Kieran hugged Leah tightly and told her how she had grown up and become a real lady. Leah also said that he too had grown and changed. Mistress Anastasia told Laius that he had done well in their absence. She understood that the brothers wanted to catch up, but they needed to discuss something. Sitting in the room with Leah, Anastasia asked if she and her brother had communicated all these 4 years. Leah said no, but she believed Kieran was a caring brother. The lady said that she heard that Laius was leaving for the capital in 2 days. Laius replied that he was able to get a place at the academy, thanks to her kindness. Anastasia replied that Mr. Theodore spoke warmly of him. and the lady praised Camillus for his good work. She said that he was now worthy to be Kieran's brother. Anastasia asked if it was possible that Leah wanted to find her mother in the capital. Leah replied that she would find her no matter what. Anastasia said that she didn't understand, since she has already entered high society, and all the nobles know her as Camillus. And she can't just show up as a girl. Leah's task is to live in the shadows, as they agreed. Anastasia had one plan. The lady said there was one way to find her mother, but we can't rush and it will take some time. Therefore, he will go to the academy. And then, when everyone starts to forget about him, they will hold a funeral for Camillus Bale, and she can return to Camillia's life again. Leah was very surprised, and Anastasia told her that she just wanted to fulfill the promise she made to her when she brought her here. The girl played her role even better than she expected. Kieran recovered thanks to her. Therefore, Anastasia wants to thank her in this way. And yet she allowed Laius to attend Kieran's engagement. After this, he will return to Gayor again. He is so hungry for knowledge. Then Leah asked for a favor. Forgive her mother. Forgive me? What a cheeky request. How dare you ask for this? Asked Anastasia. Sassy? If asking for forgiveness is impudent, then what were those 4 years that I lived as a man for? I agreed to live like Camillus in order to earn my mother's forgiveness, so please forgive us finally, Leah asked. That's enough, Mom. Funeral for the living? Camilla is a member of House Bale by blood. She is also part of our family. Kieran defended Leah. Anastasia laughed and told Kieran that Camillus came to their family just for him. And now it is of little use, and unnecessary things need to be thrown away. You are a disgrace to the House of Bale, Mother, Kieran said. Mrs. Anastasia was indignant. How dare he talk to her like that? Leah headed out of the room and her brother called her Camilla, and she replied that her name was Camillus and left the room. Camilla sat in front of the pool and cried. She didn't understand how Mrs. Anastasia could come up with such a thing. Funeral? After all, these 4 years that she spent as Camillus were not all lies, and she will never be able to return here after leaving for the capital. But why was she so attached to this place? Not now, Pippi, I want to be alone, Leah said to the one who approached her. I see you are still not a girl, Prince Ian told her. Glad to see you again, Camilla. Why are you crying? He continued as she turned around. Thank God, Marilyn, you went, Her Highness said at a banquet in the palace. Marilyn Shelby thanked her for her concern. Then Marilyn noticed Claude and greeted him. The girl wanted to thank him for visiting her when she was unconscious, but Claude was cold and said that it was time for him to leave, since they had already met. Marilyn replied that the reception had not even started yet. Then the guy said that he needed to visit Kieran. Although the girl didn't like it, he asked for forgiveness and took his leave. As Prince Ian and Claude were riding in the car, Ian informed Claude that Kieran had returned with a guest. Third son of King Lewin. Mad dog of war. The guys discussed that these savages from Gayor could not be trusted. If he is at all like his father, then that means he takes whatever he wants. The prince was surprised that Kieran was hanging out with someone like Ian. But Claude replied that it was Ian who protected Kieran when he was in Gayora. Wade was angry and so was Claude. After all, you cannot communicate with the enemy. Claude replied that Kieran was also a nobleman and knew what he was doing. And yet this does not change the fact that Kieran is dealing with an enemy prince. But if something happens to Ian Sergio while he is here, then war will be inevitable. Since due to the conflict over diamond mines in neutral territory, the stability of the region has been shaken. Camillus asked Prince Ian to stop pursuing him. He showed the prince where the banquet was taking place, but the prince said that he was here because of her, Camilla. When Laius was about to leave, he slipped and fell right into the arms of Prince Ian. He called him Camilla and she responded. Kieran called Leah and looked at Ian indignantly. He, after all, asked the prince to wait for him in the hall, and he came here to Leah. Ian replied that he was bored and decided to take a walk, and feeling a familiar smell, his feet themselves led him to Camilla. Kieran grimaced that Ian was following the scent like a dog, and he said that it was time for him to return to the hall. And he asked Leah if she had met the prince before. Leah replied that they were just having sherbet for dessert and he didn't bother her at all. In this case, it was time for them to go to the guests. It was the prince and the duke. Wade sat on the couch next to Claude. He said that he and Kieran would do this Sergio and he would look at the stars with his beloved Camillus. But Claude objected that His Highness needed to stay here to resolve all issues. Wade realized that Claude was worried about Laius. "I see you no longer treat him like a copy of your brother. An unexpected change of heart," Wade said to Claude, noticing his affection for Laius. Claude replied that his thoughts had not changed, he was just quite funny. And looking at Laius, his mood lifts. The guy told the prince how a couple of days ago he made him an offer to work as a butler in the Ihar house. But he refused. Wade asked if it bothered him so much that he would retaliate with humiliation until he got tired of it. Claude replied that on the contrary, now he wants him even more. Camillus is a work of art that Mrs. Anastasia worked so hard on. He is unique among all this rotten nobility. He is not at all like all these pigs hiding behind the titles of their fathers, who are nothing of themselves. Therefore, he wants to make it his own. Wade von Weisse and Claude de Ihar introduced themselves to Ian Sergio. Ian asked Claude if he was the ruler of Del Casa. Claude replied that his father was still in good health. Ian noticed that all the same, everything that belongs to his father will become his. Claude thanked him for looking after Kieran and Gaiora. Laius stood and wondered when this would all end and why he needed to be present. He was glad that Mrs. Anastasia would come now, and they would communicate without him. But when Prince Ian was called to go into another room, he said that he would be delayed because he needed to finish his conversation with Camillus. Everyone was surprised by this, and Claude said that His Highness was waiting for him, and Laius asked to postpone the conversation until later, since His Highness is much more important. But His Majesty Ian Sergio said, "You are mistaken, Camillus, you are more important to me, you still haven't said why you cried?" Claude looked at them, not knowing what to do, and Kieran interrupted Ian with his stern look, and Ian told him that he was just teasing Laius. Then Claude invited everyone to enter the hall. Sitting at the table, Wade asked Mistress Anastasia if Camillus would join them. Anastasia replied that Laius had returned to his chambers and was not feeling well. Her long absence probably took its toll on him, and now she will make sure that he is looked after properly. But Claude did not understand her, because the prince said that he found Laius crying alone on the street. Claude thought that no one would want to eat in such an environment. "It looks like today he will eat only sweets again," he said out loud. Mrs. Anastasia, sitting nearby, heard this and asked what he meant. And Prince Ian put food on a plate and asked the maid to take it to Laius's room. "And he asked me to tell him that refusing food is harmful to health, but if his health worsens, he can always take him with him to Gaior." Mistress Anastasia was angry, and Kieran thanked him for his concern and said that they would remember his proposal just in case. But Kieran thought to himself that this place was not suitable for such a defenseless girl. Even Gaior looks like a fairy tale compared to this lion's den. Prince Ian said that in his opinion this place was not suitable for Laius, and he asked Claude what he thought. Claude was silent. Then Ian said that he meant venison. In Gaiora this dish is considered a delicacy, but Claude asked for forgiveness for his next words, which he was forced to say. "Meat from Gaior does not deserve a place on the imperial table. Appearance, how to say, I thought they brought me something rotten," Claude continued. Claude decided to end this squabble, and asked the lady for permission to join them later when the drinks were brought, and he went out for a walk along the corridor. The guy walked along the corridor and wondered if Camillus was avoiding him in order to have fun with the visiting savage. Suddenly, he noticed a maid with a tray. Then Claude stopped her and asked if this was food for Camillus. He asked to bring him sweets from the table instead of this food. The maid said that it was the prince who asked to bring him this food, and Claude asked if she wanted to feed him this slop from Gaior. Claude told her, "Let's take Camillus what he really likes." When they approached Laius's door with a bowl of sweets and knocked on the door, no one opened it. Standing outside were Betty and the rest of the maids with whom Leah had lived for 4 years. They said they decided to throw her a going-away party. Leah was pleased that all these people showed so much concern for her. They asked her not to forget about them when she reached the capital, and thanked her for her kindness to them. When Betty approached her, Leah hugged her tightly and asked her to promise that she would take care of herself after she left. Betty said that she had already instructed Pippi about her tasks, so they shouldn't have any difficulties. Leah thanked Betty for her concern. Betty also asked not to wander around at night and to be careful with strangers, especially those who would lure you with candy. They are the worst. And she asked me to be sure to find my mother. Leah sat at the table thinking that this was probably the last time she would see everyone here. Suddenly, the maid brought a vase of sweets, and behind her stood Mr. Claude. When Leah was younger, she thought of him as a typically arrogant nobleman. But there is not a single word that can describe Claude de Ijara. He's the type of person who makes you nervous out of fear of being ridiculed. Someone who sometimes likes to fool around. The one who smells like lavender. A mysterious man who shows kindness when you least expect it. But I'm no longer a little child who loves sweets, Leah thought, putting the candy in her mouth. The next morning, the maids said goodbye to Camellia on the street. Kieran came out to say goodbye and hugged Leah tightly. He asked forgiveness for his mother, who would not be able to go out. Kieran asked her not to take it to heart, and he reminded her that he would soon visit her in ether. "Okay, then I'll go," said Leah. Prince Sergio wanted to hug Leah's goodbye, but he was cold and said, "Take care of yourself." Ian asked why he hated him so much. Leas replied that this was not the case at all. Ian just puts him in an awkward position all the time. Leas wanted to get into the carriage, but Prince Wade was already sitting there. Since the prince felt very bad after the Gaior wine, he said that he was taking this carriage for himself and Leas would have to find another one. "Are you coming?" Claude asked Leas, standing near his car. Kieran suggested that Leas take up Claude's offer. After all, a car is much faster than a carriage, and Kieran promised it would be fun. And also Claude will be able to take care of him. These words made Ian laugh. "Shouldn't he be the first thing to worry about?" he said to Leas. But he replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. Then Ian grabbed Leah's hand and whispered in her ear, "All men are animals, Camellia, be careful." Leah was outraged by his words. Claude asked Leas to hurry up. As Leas boarded the carriage, apologizing for the delay, Claude said it was not his fault. But in fact, they are late because His Highness got drunk on this rubbish from Gaior. And since Laius was done with goodbyes, they left. Leas was shaking heavily from the fast ride. Claude held his hand. He asked if Leas was eating well since his arms were very thin. Leas replied that his stomach was like a bottomless pit, and those sweets that Monsieur Claude sent him were so sweet that his lips stuck together. Monsieur Claude brought his hand to his face and smelled it. He said he still smelled like candy, and they seemed to be sweeter than he thought. When Laios fell asleep in the car because of the long journey, Claude looked at him and thought that in all these years he had not changed at all. His smell attracted Claude so much. It seemed too sweet to him as for a man, and nothing about him looked like a man. Claude thought he was going crazy, and he kissed his lips. When Leah got out of the carriage, she thought that she must have hit her head when she was sleeping because her head hurt at the sight of the injury, and for some reason her lips were wet. She hoped she wasn't drooling in her sleep. They approached a beautiful house with flowers. Claude asked why Leos would live here and not in the dorm. He replied that his father was worried that he would not get used to the lifestyle in the hostel. "Someone like you would get the biggest room in the dorm," Claude told him. Leos replied that he is a rather private person. Then Claude remembered how calmly he behaved with the man he had just met. His shyness doesn't seem to extend to foreigners. When they were already inside the house, Claude asked why Leos did not stay at the house of the Marquise of Belle. He replied that this place was too big for him. But Claude didn't believe it and asked if there was another reason. Then they went up the stairs to Laios's room. She was beautiful. There was a wonderful view of the city from the window. And in Corsor there was nothing but forests and trees. Claude told him to enjoy it while he could. At night, the city becomes noisy. And he asked what the Marquis was thinking about, sending him here to live alone. Leos didn't understand why Claude was so upset that he wouldn't be living in the dorm. When leaving, Claude told Leos to eat less sweets and eat normally, at least once, otherwise he himself would soon turn into one big candy. What's wrong with him? Leah thought. She checked to see if he had really left by looking outside the door. And then she opened her closet with dresses and a wig. Mom will never recognize me if I look like a boy, Leah thought, holding the wig in her hands. But she was worried that she had changed so much that her mother still wouldn't recognize her. Claude sat in his pool and remembered that kiss. The driver also noticed this. Damn it, he's a man, Claude thought and covered his face with his hands. In the morning, standing at the window, Claude reflected that not only did Leos not look like a man, but he had settled in a place more suitable for a girl. He thought that his feeling was just ordinary curiosity, but his thoughts were interrupted by a maid who brought him a letter that was handed over from the palace. A few days before, when Camillus arrived at the academy, everyone was whispering behind his back about the fact that he is the youngest son of the Marquise, and about the fact that he doesn't look like a guy at all. He was met by a professor he already knew, and took him to the examination class. The professor praised Leos and said that he could not wait to find out his exam results. On the way to the office, they met Claude. He stood and did not look at Lias at all, as if he was looking up at him. And Lias did not understand what happened to him. When Lias entered the office, the guys in the corridor began to discuss and insult him, saying that he was a bastard born in a swamp. And how could Marquis Bale even dare to bring him to the academy? And then Claude interceded and said that they had no right to insult the son of the Marquis of Bale, the emperor's favorite, and they themselves are empty-headed sons of small counts. One of them said that he didn't mean to say anything bad. He just meant that Lias was an easy prey for all sorts of perverts. Claude was frightened by this phrase. As everyone gathered in the auditorium for Lias's examination, the director said that he expected great things from him. Claude did not like the director's behavior. Lias remembered his classes with the teacher, who said that the academy teaches society. That is, they study an ideal society in which people get what they deserve, and that a person's future does not depend on his social status. The academy also teaches mathematics and literature in order to understand how to build such a society. But, in fact, he was very uncomfortable at the academy, and this is not an entrance exam at all. For them, he is just a nobody, with rumors about his birth. And they don't care about his knowledge, they check what he should know as part of a noble family. They decide whether he is worthy to be part of it. This is what a famous academy consists of. He felt his expectations were too high. The exam time is up, and why did the director come over? He said he hoped Lias did the best he could, and he asked me to wait a little so they could check everything. Lias noticed that Claude was still there. The committee praised Lias for his excellent performance. He was the first to achieve a perfect score since Kieran Bale. It seems that this genius is in their blood. His Highness Wade praised Lias and said that he lived up to his reputation. And Lias replied that he just had a good memory. That's the whole secret. Prince Wade said that this is the most difficult thing. And he added that since he had a perfect score, he could choose which class to join. The director said that it would be possible to choose a hostel, but in his case it would not be useful. But it seems to him that 9th grade will suit Lias best. Lias asked if he should answer now, and the professor said that he had a week to do so and offered to give him a tour of the academy. But Claude suggested that he himself would give Lias a tour of the academy. The professor said it was unexpected, but Claude reminded him how long he had waited for Lias to enter the academy. Then Leah remembered how the professor persuaded his father and said that the Ihar house hoped to see Camelius at the academy as soon as possible. So it was true. Claude put his arm around Lias's waist and took him on a tour. Prince Ian, watching this, thought, well, but said nothing, just looked after them. Holding his hand, Claude led Lias outside, and he told him that Lias would not go to 9th grade. Lias was surprised because the director said that his knowledge was enough. Claude said that director Eddie Kirchman looked at him very suspiciously, and there are a lot of strange rumors about him. Is that all? Asked Lias in surprise. Don't you understand? Claude asked. But Lias told Claude that he was here as a student and he was not interested in gossip about professors. Looking back, Leah did not understand that her thoughts were too busy with an incomprehensible future. Her goal was to graduate as soon as possible. After all, when Kieran returns home and her mother is found, she will no longer be able to continue her studies here, and she didn't want to create even more problems. When Lias answered Claude, "What difference does it make what orientation the professor is? This doesn't apply to me in any way," Claude asked in surprise. "It doesn't apply then. Are you sure?" Then Lias asked to leave this topic and said that he would think about his words. Lias saw the hippodrome and began asking about the horses and the famous academy stables. Claude asked him not to change the topic and choose 8th grade, since he won't be able to breathe if he chooses 9th grade, then he will sit at textbooks all year. Leah wondered why he didn't immediately explain everything to her about the class. When a horse approached them, Lias wanted to pet it, but Claude removed her hand, saying that the horse might bite. When Claude again saw his shiny lips, which were so inviting, he wants to kiss them. But he came to his senses in time and said that there was something on his face that needed to be removed. Claude noticed 2 guys in uniform approaching them. Then he asked Lias to go to his home straight along the road, and they would continue the excursion another time. The guys said that they had come to accompany Mr. Claude, since he received permission from His Majesty, but on the condition that his people join the city guard. This meant that the Emperor allowed him to conduct the investigation. Claude asked if they had found the culprit. His Majesty thinks that he could not go far and there is only one place. Lower. Claude has ordered that someone familiar with the area be found, and they will go investigate tonight. The guy thoughtfully stroked his horse. In the evening, near Camelia's house, Pippi asked if she could cope alone. Camelia was beautiful in a chic dress with long hair. Pippi was worried that it was dangerous for her to go out in such an outfit. People will immediately understand that she is not local. Leah replied that Pippi didn't know Lower as well as she did. Leah asked Pippi about her hair, whether it made her stand out too much. Pippi replied that they had not seen each other for too long, and she would not recognize her without them. Then Camelia thought that Pippi was right and told her, "I'll be back soon." The coachman gave her a lift and said, "Wait for me in the northern part until I return." He asked if she was familiar with the area. The girl replied that it was enough to survive. Leah recognized the place right there, around the corner, where she lived with her mother. Leah ran. The house was already so close. A guy came out from around the corner and she crashed into him and almost fell, but he caught her. It was Claude. "Camelius!" The first thing Claude thought and asked, looking into the girl's eyes. "Mr. Claude? But what is he doing here?" Leah thought. Leah covered her head with her hood and turned to leave. Claude apologized for confusing her with someone else. He thought that his eyes were already mocking him. Well, it can't be that this girl is Camelius. Then he asked her to tell her name, but she was silent. Leah thought he was too close to her and remained silent. Claude asked if she was mute, but then I thought that at least she could hear him. Claude offered to guide her if she was lost or needed help. After all, these streets are not a place for a lonely, beautiful lady. While Leah followed Claude, she noticed that he was leaving marks on the wall. The girl was wondering what to do now. He will guess immediately who she is. She decided to overtake him and go first. Claude realized that she was a local because she knew the road well. And the guy asked, "After all, she's not really dumb." Leah saw a carriage ahead and rushed forward. Claude ran after her. She paid the coachman and asked him to say that he dropped her off south of the Lion Bridge, in front of the statue of St. Matthew. When the carriage left, Claude ordered that the carriage crossing the bridge be found, adding that it seemed they had found someone who could guide them through the lower slums. Leah lay awake all night wondering if Claude recognized her. That place was very close, a few steps away, and they stopped her at such a bad time. Suddenly, Pippi ran into the room and said that Mr. Leus needed to get dressed urgently. He shouldn't be seen like that. After all, Mr. Claude arrived to them. When Leus came out into the living room, Claude was already sitting at the table. He said someone woke up late. Leus asked for forgiveness and said that he had trouble sleeping. Leus asked what brought Monsieur Claude to him at such an early time, and he asked Leus if he didn't know. Leus replied that he could not read minds. Claude asked Leus to have a proper breakfast since they had to visit a place. His brother Kieran asked to show him life in the imperial capital. When they were in the city center, Claude asked Leus to fill these streets. The beginning of all roads is measured from this building, the Cohen Bank. The guy said that since he was taken straight into the 9th year, it should be easy for him to remember the surroundings. Leus remembered this place from his lessons. The academy is 2.7 miles northeast, and the imperial palace is 3 miles from Cohen's Bank. Claude praised Leus for being a fast learner, but for some reason he had a strange feeling next to Leus. He became impulsive. He not only wanted to kiss him but also called the girl by his name. It was a terrible feeling and also inappropriate behavior for him. When they approached the river where the monument was visible, Leus said that all the people here looked so happy, and that life in Etera was probably very comfortable. But Claude replied that darkness always follows light. The stronger the light, the deeper the darkness, and you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Then Leus said that people living in darkness do not know that they are not in the light. And ignorance is bliss, he continued, looking at the slums on the other side of the river. Claude became interested and asked why Leus thought that. He replied that happiness is relative, and we always think that life is unfair only when we see those who are better than us. But if we remain naive from the very beginning, then all we will know is the life into which we were born, and it's not about meeting needs at all. Claude suggested that he break away from these sad thoughts and move on. He again gave him a jar of sweets and called him a child that he loved sweets. While Leus asked that Claude was not much older than him, the guy opened the carriage door and said that since he had seen the bright side, it was time to show the dark side in the slums of Lower. When they were already driving, Leos asked if they were really going to Lower and why, and Claude asked what he had heard about this place. Leos replied that it was better to stay away from him. Then Claude asked if he knew that Lower was located directly behind Lyon, which his windows overlooked. Leos thought that he needed to answer something so that he would not be found out. Is that so? And I was wondering why that side of the river is always darker at night, and I had no idea. So this is Lower? Answered Leos. When they got out of the carriage, Claude said that Lower was the folly and shame of the empire, a thorn in the heavenly garden. Leah thought he suspected something, and thus tests Leos, but he must not take the bait. That's why Leos said that he felt sick just from the smell of this place. Leos asked to leave, but Claude said that he would have to be patient. After all, for them this is an ordinary landfill, but for someone this place is called home. The bright light of the city cast a large shadow over this place. Leah did not agree, but forced herself to remain silent so as not to give herself away. Leos very much asked Claude to return him home, because this place scares him very much, and Claude agreed to take him home. As they rode in the carriage, Claude apologized to Camillus for being shocked by the place. For some reason, he decided that Leos already knew him. But Leos said it was his first time here, and Leah hoped that Claude believed in this legend because it was difficult to understand from his face. Leos occasionally glanced at Claude. Claude told Leos that he would take him home first, and then he had an appointment for dinner. Leos replied that they would have to hurry then, and Claude was offended, because he expected a different answer from him. It seemed to him that Leos always looked happy when he had to leave. But Leos replied that this was not so, and that he would be happy to have dinner with him that evening. Then Claude said that he could reschedule his meeting for another day. "You can't, it would be very rude of you," Leos replied. They wanted to say goodbye, standing near Camillus's house. But Claude noticed a white horse near the house and told Camillus that it looked like he had guests, and apparently named, as Claude believed. When they entered the house, they saw Prince Ian Sergio arriving from Gyor. He was lying on the sofa and, as always, was happy to see Camilla. Leos reminded Claude that he was rushing to a meeting, and Claude said that it would be better for His Highness to stay at his estate in the capital. But Camillus objected. "After all, Prince Ian is a guest of the Bale House, and that would be wrong. So you'll let him stay alone with you?" Claude asked and took his candy jar. Camillus asked him which gentleman takes his gifts back, and Claude replied that he didn't want him to smell like candy. Ian came very close to Leos and whispered, "Camillus, forget about sweets and eat normally. I've been waiting for you all day and I'm very hungry." Leos reprimanded Ian that he was too close. "I will treat you, Your Highness. Camillus arrived in the capital quite recently. I will be the best guide for you," said Claude. "But still, I prefer Camillus's company," said Ian. But Claude insisted that he would be safer accompanied by him. After all, this is the capital of another state. Prince Ian said that Claude was right. But since he was very tired from the long journey, he would spend the rest of the day here, resting with Camillus. This means that he won't go anywhere. But it's time for Lord Claude to leave. Claude didn't know what else to say, so he went to the meeting. The gentleman said that he no longer thought that Mr. Claude would be able to honor them with his visit, but he still came. Claude asked for forgiveness and said that he had some business to attend to. The man asked if Claude's father was still surrounded on neutral territory, and it would be an honor to receive the Grand Duke here in the imperial capital. Claude replied that his father had no plans to pay a visit yet. "The security of the empire depends on the north, and my father is a very pragmatic person." Then the gentleman got to the point and said that his daughter had recently gotten engaged, and they were thinking of holding her wedding after the marriage ceremony of Princess Rosina and Mr. Kieran Bale. When Claude imagined Camillus next to this girl, he felt uneasy, but he said that he would definitely notify his father about this, and happy events should be celebrated together. The owner of the house said that he never stops thinking about what could have delayed Mr. Claude, because he is always so punctual. Claude replied that there were matters that still required his attention, and he asked for forgiveness because it was time for him to leave them. When the coachman asked Monsieur Claude where to take him, he immediately said to Camillus, and then he corrected himself, saying to go to the estate. He couldn't get rid of the memory of how Leos separated him from Ian and said, "Mr. Claude, the prince will stay in the Bale House, period." Claude didn't like the fact that Leos called Ian by his first name, and he was worried that this damned prince had some kind of unhealthy interest in Camillus. Otherwise, he wouldn't. His thoughts were interrupted by a message from a guy in uniform. Mr. Claude, we found her. That night only one dark green carriage crossed the bridge. According to the cab driver, the passenger got off at the statue of St. Matthew. It was a girl in an expensive robe. Claude wondered if something was wrong here. He knew that the only estate in that area belonged to the house of Ihar. But since they did not receive guests that night, this meant that the cabman had lied. Is the problem with these candies? Leah thought, looking at the jar. Prince Ian, sitting on the sofa, insisted that Leos eat something other than these sweets. Leah offered the prince one piece of candy and put it in his mouth. Ian deliberately licked her hand. This was inappropriate behavior for a member of the royal family. Leos said that it was time for him to return to his chambers, and His Highness could move to their family estate as soon as he rested. But the prince insisted that he wanted to talk to Leah one-on-one, because they did not have such an opportunity. She replied that she had nothing to tell him, but still, he persuaded her to sit next to her on the sofa and asked if Claude knew that she was a girl. Leah replied that even the walls have eyes and ears, and she was uncomfortable with this conversation. Ian asked how long Leah planned to continue this masquerade. The girl replied that she did not know. Then the prince got down to business. His father wants him to find a wife among the nobility of the Cayenne Empire. Marriage is the best way to establish diplomatic relations. Leah said that if he needed advice, she didn't know any suitable ladies. But Prince Ian said he didn't need advice. Then Leah didn't understand what he wanted. Your father, Marquis Bale, is an imperial nobleman, and I'm going to officially ask him for your hand in marriage. Ian stunned her. Leah objected that she was a man, but the prince knew very well that she was a woman. He was already dreaming that they would hold the ceremony next year, and also that she can make her formal debut before the wedding ceremony as Camellia Bale and return to her real self. Prince Ian, Leah exclaimed. What? Have you already given your heart to someone else? Let me guess. Claude de Ishar? Asked Ian. Don't rush, we have a whole year, think it over carefully. I can save you from that witch you call mother. Leah replied that this was not necessary. Ian thought she would be delighted and asked if she didn't want to be a girl again. Leah replied that she was not a real noblewoman, and it will be right to leave everything behind when this is over. Ian asked her again how long she planned to live a lie. Leah didn't want to continue this conversation. Leah asked how he could ask for her hand in marriage if they had only met 3 times. Ian replied, "Okay, then there will be a funeral." The girl asked if he overheard their conversation with Anastasia, and Ian replied that she was very harsh and loud, and many people heard their conversation then. But Leah replied that the idea of marriage did not suit her. She doesn't want to participate in these political games, and she asked not to involve her in diplomacy and alliances. Then Prince Ian told her that not everything is as complicated as it sounds, and he just fell in love with her, that's all. Camellia was surprised. The prince repeated that they would have a whole year to get to know each other better, and he said that he would wait for her answer until next year. Ian also told Leah that Kieran was returning in 10 days, so they will have 10 whole happy days alone with each other. The next day, going to the academy, Leah remembered Ian's words that they would be together for 10 whole days, and she mentally asked Kieran to come back as soon as possible. Suddenly, she was called out by Lord Thorin, the guy who insulted her to Claude. Leas greeted him, and he said that he expected to see Kieran Bale, and not a useless imposter. Lias replied that his brother had no intention of returning to the academy. Thorin laughed at the fact that Kieran had spent 4 years in Gyora and had already defected. Then Thorin said that Kieran probably knows that only graduates of the academy can claim noble titles. "Oh, you didn't hear? Kieran already graduated 4 years ago," Lias told him with a smile. Lias laughed at the fact that Thorin was not up to date with the latest events. And this is not surprising because it is easy to miss something without having friends sharing the news. Thorin was offended by this and decided to say something offensive. He said that everyone knows that Leos got into the academy because of his cute face, and since he is only a first year, he is not stupid enough to make enemies for himself. You don't want to disgrace your father's good name? You already know it. You are a disgrace to the house of the Bales, Thorin whispered to Leos. Leos clenched his hand into a fist. Lias pulled himself together and said in a calm tone, "Lord Thorin, you continue to look down on the one the Marquis recognized. How dare such a nameless family as yours discredit the name of the Marquis? You were brave enough to say his name, but stupid enough to make such a powerful enemy as the Marquis Bale. And don't forget that I'm not a first-year student like you, And I'm in my 9th year of study, added Laius. He also asked the surprised Thorin not to come into his sight again. Leah became sad. She wondered when she became like this. Yes, she understood that this was the best way to deal with such people. But what to do? She got carried away and told this idiot everything about the 9th grade, and everyone around was already whispering about it. Leah thought that Claude would definitely give her a beating for this. As they sat in the office, the professor told Laius that he knew he would choose 9th grade, and it is a great honor for the academy to train such an outstanding student, right after his brother. Laius asked the professor if he could tell him why the officer was there. Was it because he had a row with Lord Thorin on the street? The officer asked Laius, "Sir, is this your natural voice? Do you know how to protect yourself? Do you know how to handle a dagger?" Laius did not raise the purpose of these questions, and the professor told the officer that he couldn't find a better candidate, and the officer agreed with him. "Mr. Bale, I am here to ask for your cooperation on behalf of the city guard," the officer continued. "This may put you in a difficult situation, but the lives of the townspeople are at stake, and I'm sure you will do what's right. We are looking for a man who can pretend to be a noble lady," the officer concluded. Laius didn't know what to answer to this. Sitting in a cafe on the street, Laius was thinking about refusing the officer's offer. But he remembered everything the officer told him, that a criminal attacks noblewomen, and the parents are so scared that they won't give up their daughter as bait. They need to catch the criminal as soon as possible. He will need to appear in the library, theater, station, mainly near attractions around Lower. And Laius is the one they were looking for. Leah had already decided that she would refuse the officer's application, when suddenly she saw a woman passing by on a cart. It was her mother. The girl immediately ran after the cart and shouted for the driver to stop, and she called for her mother. She was unable to catch up with her, but Leah knew for sure that it was her mother. And she was so close. Claude drank tea with the officer and asked him if Camillus agreed. The officer replied that he had not yet, but most likely he would agree. "Pretend to be a woman? Who came up with such an absurd idea?" asked Claude. The officer responded that apprehending the criminal was their top priority, but Claude was against it and said that this was the beloved brother of his best friend, and if even one hair falls from his head, they will all pay for it. There was a knock on the door, and they were informed that the man they had been waiting for had arrived. Camillus entered the office and gave his consent to the undercover case. Then Laius noticed Mr. Claude in the office. Well, Claude got up and left, ignoring Laius. He told the officer that he had to go to a meeting. The officer told Laius that Mr. Claude did not like their idea. Laius asked if he was aware of their business. The man was surprised that Laius didn't know, because they were friends. The officer replied that Monsieur Claude had supplied them with sufficient men for this investigation, so that he had been aware of the matter from the very beginning. The officer then asked if Laius knew Ms. Marilyn Shelby. After all, it was she who recommended his candidacy for this matter, and she looks forward to meeting him soon. But not now, of course, and 4 days later at the Shelby estate. Leah was very surprised by this. Claude stood in the street, stroking his horse. He wondered if Laius had actually agreed to this investigation. And why did it bother him so much? Prince Wade rode up to Monsieur Claude on his horse. He told him the news that Laius had entered his 9th year of study, and about the fact that he disgraced Lord Thorin in a verbal conversation. Wade told Claude that this Camillus is a very interesting guy. Claude said that Lord Thorin simply got what he deserved. Prince Wade asked, "Is that all? Just wondering if you and I share the same preferences?" The same preferences. This phrase never left Claude's head. The maid Pippi stood at the door and did not let Prince Ian in when he wanted to leave the house. She said that Mr. Laius forbade him to go out because it was dangerous. Pippi really asked him not to do anything that could cause trouble for Mr. Laius, but the prince did not listen to her and left the house. Ian left with a man in a black suit and a black hat. The prince ordered him to return to his brother and tell him to wait for him in a year. The man replied that this was impossible, since His Majesty ordered him to return immediately. Ian joked that his brother was probably already bored, and there was no brotherly love between them. To this, the man replied that the situation had changed. The conflict in neutral territory is intensifying every day. Therefore, its safety is paramount. Safety? He's just worried that there will be no one to fight in the front ranks in case of war, Ian answered. After all, his brother knew that there was no better warrior in Gyora than Ian. That is why he arranged surveillance in the form of this man in black clothes. Ian asked him if his brother's plan had a chance of success. The man was silent. Then Ian asked him to tell his brother that it was too early to make a move. It will be a great shame to see the collapse of the Cayenne Empire. There are too many beautiful things in this place, Ian said when he saw Leah. Prince Yan, what were you thinking when you left the house alone? The locals hate the people from Gyor, said Leah, getting out of the carriage. But the prince replied that he wanted to see her as soon as possible. He gave her his hand like a real lady. And he said that next to her, he felt like a puppy. While walking near the academy, the headmaster asked Lias if he was going to stay after a week here. Lias replied that local life suits him, so he is staying. Then Lias asked the director why Claude didn't attend lectures. The director replied that Mr. Claude was not here to attend school. The answer surprised Leah. It turns out that Claude is here to keep an eye on the prince, since His Highness has a rather freedom-loving character, perhaps even too much. It began to rain, and the director said that it looked like the rainy season had arrived. And Leah thought, how ironic. It was raining when I was picked up from lower. And it goes again when I returned. Marilyn Shelby welcomed Lias into her home. He apologized for missing her last party, but she said it was just an event for her recovery. The girl thanked Lias and said that she did not expect that he would actually agree to help Uncle Brighton. Lias thanked her in return, but actually, Leah thought that Marilyn looked like someone who was up to something. Then Marilyn said that she was very worried about believability. She was worried that a man dressed as a woman would, after all, look very suspicious. Lias said that he was also very worried about this. Pippi came into their room and Lias rushed to her. Leah was happy that she was not alone here now. She was not comfortable being alone with Marilyn. Marilyn didn't like that there would be someone else with them. And she said that cooking is a very long process for a girl, and for them it will take even longer. They went to Marilyn's room with her outfits, and Lius chose a wig with long brown hair. The servant asked if he could recommend a wig the color of his light hair. Leah remembered that meeting with Claude in a dark alley and thought, no, I can't let him recognize me. And then Lias replied that it would be a useless disguise. Phoebe asked the servant to leave the room so that she could start dressing Mr. Lias herself, explaining this by saying that he doesn't like strangers approaching him. I was truly touched, sir. When I found out that you took everything into your own hands for my sake, Marilyn thanked Mr. Claude. Marilyn said she knew he wouldn't let this direction go unpunished. She thought he was worried about her. Since she was fine now, she asked him not to worry. But Claude said that concern was spreading among the nobility. And as part of the House of Ihar, he felt it was his responsibility to deal with this during such difficult times. Marilyn said that being Camelius's escort was too much. Claude tried to distance himself from him as much as he could, but he returned to the beginning again. He even almost refused to allow the officer to accompany Camelius. But when I found out that this would be entrusted to someone else, I immediately agreed. Their conversation with Marilyn was interrupted when the maid said that Camelius was ready to show himself to them in his outfit. When Leah came out to Marilyn in a dress and with gorgeous brown hair, she lowered her eyes to the floor, and I didn't even notice Mr. Claude right away. Why is he here? Leah flashed through her head when she noticed Claude sitting on the sofa in the living room. Claude said that this image suits Lios very well, and no one will suspect at all that he is the son of the Marquis of Bale. Leah thanked Claude for appreciating her disguise. She also asked what brought Mr. Claude here. He replied that Officer Brighton had ordered her safety to be monitored. Claude was unhappy that he had to participate in this strange case because Lios agreed to the officer's request. Camelius said that he probably looked very strange next to such a beauty as Marilyn, and she asked Lios why the brown wig. Then Lios enthusiastically told how suspicious it would be to walk around with his hair color, and Claude looked at him and thought, damn you, Camelius. The servant, at Marilyn's request, brought a box with a thin steel necklace. Marilyn said that this decoration was made from the material used in knight's armor, and it will help protect her throat in case of an attack. The lady wanted to put the jewelry on Camelius's neck, but Claude stopped her and asked her to let him do it. Camelius, with or without him, you are in no danger. Do you understand? Asked Mr. Claude, fastening the jewelry around Leah's neck. She answered yes, and Mrs. Marilyn looked at them with her evil and jealous gaze. Then Claude turned to her that it was time for him to leave. After Claude left, Marilyn told Leah that she noticed something interesting. Despite Lios's graceful appearance, she thought that the disguise would be noticeable. But Marilyn admitted that when she looks at him in women's clothing, even a real woman like her fades next to him. When the lady sent Lias out saying that Mr. Claude was already waiting for him, she asked her maid who helped Camillus change clothes. The maid replied that his personal maid helped him change clothes. Marilyn didn't understand what was happening to her and why she was jealous of Claude's man. The girl asked her maid to stay in the room with Camillus next time until he finished changing his clothes, so that an important guest does not remain unattended. No matter how handsome you look, you are just a man. Still, it's better to be safe than sorry, thought Mrs. Marilyn Shelby. Leah and Claude were driving in the car and there was a moment of awkward silence. Then Claude interrupted him and asked why Leos couldn't wait to get there now. Although when they were in Lower, he was trembling like a little child, and now he's asking to go there himself. Claude didn't understand what had changed so dramatically. Leos said he was asked to help, and it turns out that only he can do this, so he must complete this task. Then Claude handed the blade into Leah's hands and showed her where to strike if protection was necessary. He held her by the hair and showed her where to aim on her leg. He pulled her so close to him and asked, "Do you understand, Camillus?" Claude touched her neck with his hand and wanted to kiss her. Leah liked it, but she couldn't give herself away. Leah wondered why there were so many students from the academy here. And besides, what is Thorin doing here? Why is he following me? Did he recognize me? And by the way, where is the help that Mr. Claude mentioned? He said there would be someone in the library who could help. Suddenly, Leah bumped into a man who said that it seemed that Mr. Thorin had his eye on her. It was the director, Eddie Kirchman. Seeing that guy looking at them, he said, "Please forgive my bad manners, my lady. How stupid it was of me not to recognize the niece of Princess Rosina's cousin." Leah said she didn't expect to see him as an assistant, and asked if it was difficult for him to remember all the streets of Lower. But Mr. Eddie replied that it was not at all difficult since he grew up there. The director said that the girl who came out of Laios is a real embodiment of beauty. "Now I understand why he is shaking so much over you. You may well be considered guilty of this, Mr. Bale," added director Eddie Kirchman. Leos said he wasn't sure he understood him. "Don't take it as rude, but instead I would like to hear what your plan is." Leos got down to business. The director continued that, as he already said, he knows the area like the back of his hand. Therefore, Leah must be kidnapped tonight. And she, as a girl, should not resist. When she is kidnapped, he will signal the city guards. Leah realized that he wanted to set up an ambush. The director asked if she could handle it. Leah replied that she could handle it. She knew that if she got to Lower safely, she could find her mother faster than she thought. Suddenly, Mr. Eddie asked if she had thought about becoming a professor after graduation. Leah noticed this look on herself, but she answered, like Leos, that he did not have specific plans for the future yet, but he was not sure that it would suit him. The director persuaded him to work for him. After all, it is his life's dream that such a talented student grows up under his guidance. Luce said if that was all, then he needed time to prepare and therefore asked to forgive him and said that he would find the director later. But Mr. Eddie grabbed his hand and said, "Just one question. How did you do that? I'm curious. How did you manage to pretend to be a girl so perfectly?" Officer Brighton showed on the map that the shelter was somewhere near this bell tower. Claude asked him if the informant had given the exact location. It turned out that they move from place to place every day, so they most likely have many hiding places throughout Lower. Also, this map was provided to them by Eddie Kirchman, and he will accompany Camillus on his mission to Lower. Claude didn't like it. He clarified whether it was the same Eddie Kirchman from the academy. The officer confirmed and added that he should now meet Camillus in the library. Claude was angry. The officer thought he felt bad and asked if everything was okay, and Claude said that if something happened to Camillus, they would all pay for it with their lives. "I'm curious, how did you do it?" Professor Eddie continued. "Show me what you're wearing. Is it a shirt?" he asked, trying to undress her. Leah remembered Claude's words that there were many different rumors about him. Did Mr. Claude really mean that he was pestering his own students? "Don't you dare touch me, I'm warning you," Leah said, pointing the dagger that Claude gave her at him. The professor said that there was nothing to be ashamed of. They were both men, and he just wants to satisfy his curiosity and not harm Leos. At this moment, Claude's long sword flashed on his neck. "I think I already warned you not to touch the students," the guy said, standing between Leah and Eddie. The director tried to calm Claude down, but he forced him to apologize to Leos. Then Eddie said that Leos was no longer a small child and could take care of himself. Claude replied that his tongue should be cut out. Leah asked him to stop. Claude then asked why Leos was protecting this idiot. Leos replied that he was not protecting anyone. It was just that this was the Imperial Library and there were too many extra eyes here. Then Claude gave him a final warning. The director left, asking Camillus to forget this little misunderstanding. And Leos thanked Claude for his help. But Claude was angry. He knew what the director wanted to do. He said he warned Leos. And Leos replied that he did not know that he would be his assistant. Leos asked Claude to let him go, but Claude asked, "Let me go? Who will you hide behind then? Have you at least once in your life stood up for yourself like a man?" To this Leos replied that he never hid behind anyone, and he will be able to take care of himself. Somehow he survived to this day without his help. Why is this attitude towards me all the time? What did I do that made you angry? Is it because I'm not courageous enough? Leos couldn't resist. "That's right, you irritate me, you get on my nerves, I hate you, Camillus Bale," Claude said, pinning Leos against the bookshelf. Leos said he knew about it from the moment he called it fake, and he promised to make every effort not to come across him in the future. Did something happen today? What about that criminal? Are you injured anywhere? Pippi asked Leah, who was lying on her bed with her face in the pillow. Leah smiled at Pippi and replied that everything was fine, and the task would be done another time. The dress just didn't fit very well, and Leah was tired of walking around in it. But more importantly, Leah was very hungry and asked if dinner was ready. Pippi happily ran to set the table and said to come down in 5 minutes. Leah lay back on the bed and looked out the window, remembering Claude's words. "I hate you, Camillus Bale." She considered herself a fool. "Have you already changed your clothes?" "What a pity, you were irresistible," said Ian, entering Leah's room. He asked why she suddenly put on a dress. Leah replied that she had some things to do today, and she asked why his hair was wet. Ian wanted to kiss her, but Leah stopped him. Ian said that his intentions were pure and he only wanted to keep her warm. Leah replied that she was not cold. Ian insisted that since it was the rainy season, he could go at any time. But Leah still refused his hug and got out of bed, saying that a bowl of soup would warm her up. "That indifference is part of your charm, but sometimes it really frustrates me," Ian told her. Unexpectedly, Leah asked Ian to teach her how to use a dagger. A little later on the street, Ian taught her self-defense and showed her the enemy's weak points. The girl remembered how Claude showed her the same points. Why did she keep thinking about him? At that moment, Ian pulled her close to him. He said that as soon as she weakened her defenses, she would immediately lose. The prince asked why she suddenly became interested in the blade. Does she really need to improve her skills? After all, while she is next to him, she will not have to hold a weapon in her hands. Leah responded that she didn't want to be the person who relied on others to protect her all the time, and she doesn't want to hide behind anyone anymore. Therefore, Leah pressed the prince to a tree and attacked with a blade. He praised her, and she said that the main thing is not to let your guard down. A few days later, Leah heard near the academy that Professor Kirchman had been suspended, and Mr. Claude tried to do this. Kirchman had always been like a thorn in his finger, especially since he touched the young servant of the Ihar house. At this moment, Thorin approached Leos. He asked if he had a sister that no one knew about. Leah pretended, and Leos got angry for hinting about an illegitimate child, saying that he only had an older brother. Leos scolded Thorin for such an assumption about an illegitimate child. And Thorin, "I apologize," said that he simply saw a girl very similar to him in the Imperial Library. "Oh, you are stopping me from passing," said Claude, approaching him. They parted, and he silently walked between them. Laios wished him a good day. Claude walked past Laios without saying a word, and in Leah's head his phrase sounded again. "I hate you, Camillus Bale." "Now much better," said Marilyn, looking at Leos in a wig with his hair color. This time she chose him herself, knowing that Leos could not refuse her. "You are too beautiful, sir. Because of this, sometimes it seems to me that you are actually a girl." "Nonsense, isn't it?" asked Marilyn. Leah opened the box that Marilyn handed to her. There was a very beautiful brooch in the shape of a bird. Marilyn said that she would protect her if her heart was attacked. But if, of course, luck smiles on her. Leos thanked Marilyn for her concern, and he said that he could stand up for himself. After all, being beautiful does not mean not being a man. Prince Wade, Mr. Claude, Mrs. Marilyn, Laios in women's clothing gathered at the table, and Prince Ian sat next to him. Prince Wade said that they were here to discuss the investigation, and catching the criminal is their main goal. He said that guards are allowed to shoot on the spot when apprehending a criminal, but Claude was against it, because it would be too dangerous for their hostage. The prince asked if he meant Camelius. Claude replied that Camelius could not be allowed to be in danger. Leah was pleased by his concern. Then Wade admitted that he was right, and that was why Prince Ian was here with them now. He agreed to help as a friend and protect Camelius on the mission. Friend? Have you just called the enemy prince from Gyor a friend? Claude asked. But Wade replied that times change, and one cannot always be on the brink of war. Claude then asked if His Majesty realized that he could put Prince Ian in danger. To this, Vale replied that it was the attackers who should worry about their lives. Claude still did not understand how His Majesty could allow Gyor to participate in the affairs of the Empire. The prince replied that in 2 days, the Bales would arrive in Ether, and they need to figure everything out before that moment. Because if the Marquis knows about Camelius being involved in this matter, then they will all have big problems. Claude asked why Camelius should risk his life for the prince's reputation. Claude turned around and went to the door. Marilyn called him, and Laius said that he would go with him. Also, I have to refuse your help, Prince Ian. You will attract a lot of attention, and I don't want things to become even more complicated than they already are, Leah said before leaving. Prince Yen promised not to interfere, but only if she finds herself in a dangerous situation. Then Leah said that the blade would protect her, not him. And Prince Wade, looking at their argument, thought that it seemed that Camelius Vale could not be taken so easily. A moment later, Claude and Leah were already sitting in the car. Claude thought that this tension was not helping at all, but he needed to accompany Laius on a mission. Leah decided to break the silence and asked where they were going. He was silent. Leah then said that she had heard that Eddie Kirchman was withdrawn and that it would be difficult for them to navigate lower without a guide. To this, the guy replied that he would be her guide. Leah was very surprised and asked again since lower is a real labyrinth. Claude replied that he already remembered the route. Laius will be introduced by their man to the group they were watching, and they will try to kidnap him, not knowing that it is a trap. A few days ago I saw a girl who looked exactly like you, Claude admitted to her, and Laius replied that it was probably because he had an ordinary appearance. And also, Laius said that he had already been told similar things about his appearance, Lord Thorin, for example. Then Claude said that he was looking for that girl. I need to check something. I think you could be that girl, Camelius Vale, Claude told Lou. Leah realized that he didn't believe it then. Are you crazy? Leah asked timidly. Well, I think I'm almost on the edge of someone, Claude replied, moving his lips closer to hers. Walking along the bridge, Leah wondered why Claude was holding her by the waist. Wasn't he standing too close? And she asked why they didn't go into lower itself. Claude replied that it was too risky. They would remain on the outskirts for now. Then Leah asked to keep a distance, since no one would want to make an enemy from the House of Ihar. But the guy said it was all part of the plan. Criminals will think that she is his lover, and this will make her even more desirable bait. Claude asked to trust him and said that he would leave the place at the right time. Leah replied that everyone in the Empire knew that Marilyn Shelby was his fiancée. Then the guy replied that if so, then that makes her his mistress. Leah was angry that she had to entertain him until the kidnappers arrived. Suddenly, Leah noticed a man walking along the bridge. She knew him. Leah remembered how he came to her mother when she was little. It was the doctor. Claude said the time has come. And leaving, he said that he would return with something sweet for her, calling her Mistress Camellia. Leah was surprised to hear her name. The guy whispered in her ear that he was improvising. Wait here, they will appear soon, and remember, your safety is the most important thing, Claude said, and left. And Leah sat on the bench and thought, is this politeness really an ordinary virtue that nobles show even to those they hate? If not, then it is because he really suspects that she is a girl. What exactly do you want to check? Leah thought indignantly. When 2 children approached the girl, an older girl and a younger boy, she realized that criminals were using children for their crimes. The children complained that they were hungry and asked to buy them some bread. Leah thought they might suspect something if she immediately agreed to go with them. And the girl offered them a coin so that they would go and buy bread themselves. But the girl said that the adults would simply take their money, and all they wanted was just to eat some bread. Leah realized that this is exactly how they lure their victims. Then Leah gave them a coin and asked that it remain their secret, and she agreed to go with them to buy them something to eat. She was upset that criminals involved children in this case. And the girl noticed that Leah was upset and asked if it was because she had to walk so far. But she really asked the lady because that store had the cheapest bread. Leah said that everything was fine, and at her age she also had to go far in search of cheap bread. When Leah bought bread and buns for the children at the store, the girl said that they were no longer very hungry and they needed to hurry up and leave here. Leah understood everything and asked the girl for a favor, whispering something in her ear. She asked the saleswoman to give the children some buns when they returned. When the girl went outside, this alley looked like a shortcut to lower. Now she understood why they brought her here. Suddenly, a guy called out to her from behind and pressed a handkerchief to her nose. Leah dropped her purse on the ground in a dark alley. The guy said it was fast, and the other guy answered him. Did you think that kidnapping a naive noblewoman would be difficult? The doctor said that for some reason she looked familiar, but they will know who she is when they get there. And he ordered 2 guys to take her away. They brought him to the bakery on this alley, the guard told Claude. Claude said that means they will track their hideout from here, but the guy objected that it was too dangerous. Claude still did not listen to him and went in search of Camelius. Ian asked permission to join him, but Claude was against it. He believed that this was not the work of a foreign prince. Prince Ian was outraged because they had taken Camelius and he couldn't just sit and wait. Claude then replied that it was part of the plan, and he reminded the prince that these were the affairs of the empire, and they had nothing to do with Gaior. Ian replied that maybe this was just another government assignment for Claude, but for him it was a personal matter. Then Claude asked who Camelius was to him. Prince Ian replied that Camelius is the one who will share the future with me. Claude didn't like it. Ian noticed Leah's bag with the kids. The children were sitting on the ground and were scared they had Leah's bag. Prince Ian held his sword and asked what happened to the owner of the handbag. Claude asked him to put the sword away and said that they were just children. Ian wondered if Claude knew Camelius was a girl. Would he have behaved the same way? But he replied to Claude that he probably didn't know that innocence and cruelty go hand in hand. In addition, children have weakly expressed feelings of guilt. And you apparently don't know how to deal with children without resorting to violence, Claude answered him. The children asked to be spared. They said they would let us go if we brought the lady here, the children told them. The saleswoman protected the children and showed which way their lady went. The girl called out to Mr. Claude and, showing him a white handbag, said that the lady asked him to give it to a handsome gentleman with blue eyes. Claude opened his purse and there was a started loaf of bread. He remembered Leus's words that he could take care of himself, and I saw crumbs of bread on the ground. The crumbs led into a dark alley. Claude told Ian that he would not take Leus with him to Gaior, adding, "He is not yours to dispose of him like that, he is mine." Did you see how he looked after her? This time we made the right choice. I hope she doesn't disappoint us like Marilyn Shelby, said one of the guys. What about the children? They saw us, so we can't let them live, can we? Asked the second guy. The doctor replied that for now they had other concerns. The guy asked what they would cut off and send first, hair or fingers. But the doctor stopped him, saying that she reminded him of someone. Looking into Leah's eyes, the doctor realized that she was not at all scared. Except for the color of your hair and eyes, you undoubtedly look exactly like Laura, the doctor told Leah, looking into her eyes. The guys remembered Laura, whom he was talking about. They said Laura said she lost her daughter a couple of years ago. That's why she left Lower. Leah was upset that her mother left, but the doctor replied that Laura had returned, and thanks to this, He did not finish and asked if this was really the same daughter, now quite an adult. What can you get by blackmailing children and kidnapping women? Leah asked. The doctor replied that it was not for a noblewoman in silk robes to teach them while their children were starving. Leah was indignant that this was coming from a man who would raise a weapon against the defenseless. The girl realized that in front of her were noble haters. Do not flatter yourself with thoughts that you are serving for a higher purpose. You are nothing more than criminals. What's next? Imprisonment? Murders? Asked the girl. The doctor slapped Leah in the face and said that Laura's daughter would never say such nonsense. And apparently he was still mistaken, and it's not her. Criminals, then. How insulting, said the doctor and ordered the guys to start with the hair. And the guy replied that the doc was too kind. He would start with the hand. Now Leah was sure that this was the same doctor who came to her mother. The girl asked why he wanted to harm the children who helped him. The guy asked why she was so worried about the children who were abandoned by their parents. There was even no one to mourn them. They are on the street because their parents cannot feed them because of the nobles. The girl told him to stop passing off ridiculous statements as facts, and don't pretend to be heroes when all they could do was hide behind their puppets. The guy grabbed Leah by the hair and said that she should beg for mercy and not argue with him. And the girl replied that he should beg for mercy. Then he got angry and cut off a clump of her hair with a sword. And he said that even on the verge of death, they cannot get rid of their pride, although they begin to beg for mercy when they notice a drop of blood. "Do you have any idea how many brave nobles died by my hand?" asked the doctor. Leah said it didn't matter what he did to her or how many people he killed. He replied that he was 12 and she would become the 13th. While he was saying that they all deserved to die, Leah slowly cut the rope that tied her hands with her blade. The doctor said that this was because they treated their slaves like animals and killed commoners for no reason. "You can't even imagine what it's like to be treated worse than insects," the doctor said. But Leah interrupted him. She said that those who shout so much about inequality on the part of the nobility themselves treated the children who helped them worse than insects. "And these children are looked after by my people. We knew you would want to get rid of them to cover your tracks," Leah told them. The doctor didn't understand what she was talking about. "I wonder how you're going to shut them up now that they're under the supervision of the city guard. A humiliating future in prison awaits you, thanks to the nobles you despise. And just so you know, I'm not the Duke's mistress," Leah admitted, taking off her wig. She introduced herself as Camillus Bale, second son of Marquis Gilliard Bale, and the one whom the family does not need. The doctor did not believe why the Marquis would abandon his son. Leah replied that it was a long story, but if he pulls the trigger, it will attract soldiers here. Leah said that dreamers like them would hardly want to die such a meaningless death. The doctor replied that when he learned her name, he had a better plan. They will escape using her as a hostage. Leah reminded that she was an unwanted child and they would sign their own death warrant. The soldiers would shoot at them all. When Leah showed that her hands were no longer tied, and thanks to the crumbs of bread, Mr. Claude and the city guard would come for her. Then the guy pointed his sword at her earring and said that one such trinket could feed his family for months. "Yes, with this no one will have to go hungry," he said. "What's the point if they're already close?" the other guy asked, pointing a gun at him and Leah. The doctor shouted and he shot at them. The doctor looked at their bodies, which lay covered in blood. He told the other guy that they had to leave because they had already been found. Their plans cannot be allowed to fall apart. Then the doctor wounded his own hand and went out to the city guard himself. Claude ordered not to shoot as they might have a hostage. Claude approached him. He was on his knees and begged him to spare him since he was a doctor. Claude presented a gun to his head and asked where the girl was. The guard informed Mr. Claude that they had found a body. Claude imagined that Leas was dead, but Ian said that the doctor cannot be trusted since he is one of them. But the doctor told them that the criminals called him to examine the wounded girl, but she turned out to be dead. And so, he tried to escape. Then Claude ran into the building and rushed to Camillus. "I found him on the floor, and when I realized that he was alive, I asked if everything was okay, if he was injured." Leos replied that it was nothing serious and his advice was useful. Holding a bloody blade in his hand and pointing at the criminal on the floor, Leos asked if he was alive. Claude asked him not to think about it now and asked if he could stand. And then Prince Ian approached them and said that he would take Leos home. He picked her up and carried her. When Ian carried Leos away, Claude sat on the floor and thought, "Why him and not me?" Then he ordered the victims to be collected and the doctor arrested. And also he ordered to find out who owned the ship they were currently on. Someone shot at the ship to cover their tracks. Prince Ian was treating the wounds on Leah's face. When the girl reminded him that she asked Pippi to do this, the prince said that this was a common thing for him. "Why did you risk your life for this?" Ian finally asked her. Leah's answer was simply because she could help. The guy told her that she was attracting too much attention to herself, thus unconsciously forcing everyone to notice you. Leah didn't understand what he was talking about. Then Ian said that he really liked to see her dressed like a lady, but he couldn't let her charm everyone in the area. Leah said indignantly that he would not joke, and Ian asked if it looked like he was joking and kissed her tenderly on the cheek. The girl was outraged, and the prince said that this was her punishment for seducing another man. Leah denied such behavior. Then Ian said that she needed rest and he would check on her later. Once out the door, he asked Pippi to bring Leos a change of clothes and to call him if she noticed any serious wounds. Standing in the corridor, he remembered Claude's words that Leos was his. He knew he was his rival, but he wondered if Claude knew the truth about Leos. At that moment, Claude approached him. Ian said he didn't expect to see him here, but the guy didn't come alone, but with some beaten guy. Claude said he was hiding near the estate, and Claude reminded Prince Ian that their hospitality extended only to him and not to his spies. To this, Ian replied to Claude that he understood that he was worried about Camelius, but this was not a spy, but a person introduced by his brother to look after him. Claude replied that his lies were not believable. Ian knew that Claude didn't believe him, and that wasn't surprising. Then the prince called the spy and said that he would be punished. When Pee-Pee was treating the wounds, Leah somewhere in the chest area, Mr. Claude entered their room. He took Leas by the hand and asked him to take off his shirt to see if his ribs were broken. Leah replied that everything was fine and her maid would help her with this. She wondered why he came without even saying anything. It seemed to her that he suspected something. And then she herself admitted to him that she was not the girl he was looking for. Claude touched her face with his hand and said that it didn't matter whether it was her or not. Then Leah asked what brought him here to her. Claude replied that he needed a witness because the doctor nevertheless deceived the guards and escaped. The girl remembered the doctor and the fact that he knew her mother. Perhaps he could help her find it. Claude said the most important thing is that Lias is okay. Then Lias asked Claude for a favor. This concerned those children who handed him the purse. They had to be placed somewhere in a house as servants, since the criminals would not leave them. Claude didn't understand why he needed to do this. Lias said that they had seen even more than he had and would become indispensable witnesses. "Don't you want to catch those who attacked your bride?" asked Lias. The guy laughed and said that he and Marilyn were not engaged. Then he kissed Leah's hand and said that this began with him from the very moment they met. "You, who appeared before me as Kieran's brother, unlike any other aristocrat, looked like a stranger who did not know how to hide his emotions. At first I was simply surprised by the open dissatisfaction in your gaze, but after that I realized that you were only giving me this uncomfortable look. And I felt such pain that I could not describe. Anger, irritation, anxiety, bewilderment. By the time I realized that something was wrong with me, my feelings had become overwhelming. It probably happened from the moment I first met you," Claude admitted. Leos asked if he didn't hate him. Claude replied that he never hated him. And when Mr. Claude left, Leah could not bring herself to gather her thoughts for a long time. A few days later, Laius sat in the Bale estate in ether. Leah really hoped that the escaped doctor was not planning to harm her mother. She has a very kind heart. She would never have thought that he was such a person, and the Duke, after that day they did not see each other. Leah had so many worries in her head. Her older brother Kieran approached her. He has finally arrived. The brother immediately asked Leah if she was okay. But before she had time to answer, Mrs. Anastasia entered the room. She told Leas that she would talk to him later and his thoughtless actions would not go unpunished. But that will have to wait until he gets better. Anastasia said that that's all for today and he can go to the mansion. Kieran hugged Leah and said the most important thing was that she was safe. Kieran offered Leah a ride home, but she objected, worried that he was probably tired from the trip. But the brother said that he could not afford to rest. After all, he knows that in his absence 2 rather annoying parasites have been bothering her. And now that he's back, no one will bother her. Leah walked to the academy and thought how good her brother was, like an angel descended from heaven. She really wanted to have dinner with him one day. It had been less than a week since her brother Kieran had returned to the capital, and he immediately headed the capital's society. Princess Rosina's betrothed. But the fact that he has the blood of the emperor's favorite, Marquis Gilliard Bale, is one of the few things that makes him attractive in the eyes of the court. And Leah found him attractive in every sense of the word. She was very glad to have such a brother in her life, but she was pestered by his fans. Once again, when Leah ran away from them, she hid in some house in the garden. When she sat down on the sofa, it turned out that someone was already lying there. It was Claude. Leah asked what he was doing here. The guy asked Leos not to scream and said that he was just sleeping in his personal resting place. Leos said that if he had only known that this was his vacation spot, he would never have entered here, and he asked to let him go as he could find another place. Claude hugged Leos, and Leah thought he smelled so nice of lavender. She buried herself in his chest and inhaled the machine to its fullest, lying on top of him on the sofa. Leos jumped up and walked towards the exit. Then he stopped and asked why Claude didn't ask him about that day. The guy replied that his safety is the only thing he cares about. Leah, leaving the house, did not understand what it was now. He found out who she really was or whether he preferred men. Can't be. Suddenly, Leah heard a familiar voice that told her that even her wounds could not keep her at home. It was Ian, and he said he missed her. "One heartless villain is watching over me, but any danger is worth seeing you," he admitted to Leah. At that moment, Kieran was watching him from the window. Kieran was sitting in a room with 2 officers. He clarified with them what they told him, that Eddie Kirchman recommended Camelius as bait in their investigation, and they in turn disguised his brother as a girl. But the officer said the operation went well. But that day a man was seen next to Mr. Camelius, and he had ashen hair and was dressed like a nobleman. Kieran asked why they were looking for him. The officer reported that 7 people were shot that night, and the bullets found in the bodies were not from their empire. The officer believed that whether he was a criminal or not, the culprit must answer for every death, and Kieran replied that the prince was the emperor's guest, so it was unlikely that he was involved in this. Kieran then asked the officers where Eddie Kirchman was. He was told that he had been fired. This was answered by Claude, who entered their room. Sitting down on the sofa, Claude told his friend that his arrival had quite shaken the capital. Many girls have their eyes on the chosen one of Princess Rosina, and Her Highness is probably not particularly happy about this. Kieran replied that even if this was true, he was faithful to his bride, and he asked what was really bothering Claude. Claude admitted that he had recently met a girl who looked exactly like Camelius. Kieran joked that no one could match his younger brother's beauty. Then Claude admitted that he wanted to find her. Kieran immediately jumped up and said that he had to go to dinner with Rosina. "You've always been a bad liar, Kieran," thought Claude sitting on the sofa. "I had no idea that there was such a place at the academy. It reminds me of Corsor. How did you find it?" Leas asked Ian. The prince replied that he followed the smell of water and knew that she would like it. Leah was surprised that the water had a smell. Ian admitted that Corsor is as beautiful as she is. Leos replied that he had heard that there were also beautiful places in Gaiora, and asked if the prince was missing home. Ian replied that he did not want to return. However, he had already run out of excuses to stay here. Therefore, he will have to return home as soon as Kieran's engagement ceremony is over. "Let me give you a parting gift before I leave, whatever you want," Ian said, approaching Leah's lips. Leah replied that there was no gift that she would like to receive. Then the prince asked if it might be something that she didn't think he could get. "Yes, exactly, this is far beyond your capabilities," answered Leah. "Well then I'll help you get to lower," the prince suddenly offered her. Ian assured her that he could do it, and would cover her while she looked for what she wanted to find. Leah was surprised, and thought that it was his brother who told him, but the prince admitted that he himself guessed everything. After all, she leaves more clues than she thinks. Ian stroked Leah's cheek with his hand. "I haven't taken my eyes off you since the moment I stepped foot on this earth. I told you it was love at first sight, Camelius," admitted the prince. They heard some rustling in the bushes. Ian saw that it was Claude, and he asked Leah again how he could help her. She said that she herself would find what she had lost. Then Ian said that it might be a long time before they could see each other again. That's why he wants to give her such a gift. Leah said it was time for her to go home, and he had better get home before dark as well. "I better hurry," Prince Ian thought as Leah left. At the Metropolitan City Watch office 10 days later, an officer informed Kieran and Camelius that they had interrogated the suspects, and they could not act on their own. Camelius said that the orders were given by a man they called the Doctor. But now, as Leah guessed, they realized that he was not behind all this. The officer added that they also found out that the goal of the criminals is not revenge. They ask for ransom for hostages to finance their activities. Are they really threatening my mother too? This is more serious than I thought, Leah thought. As the officer said goodbye to them, Kieran noticed how sad she was. As Leah swam in the water lying on her back, she thought that it was for the best that Kieran had been so busy these days. She remembered Mrs. Anastasia's words about punishment. It looked like there would be patrols in Lower for a long time, and Leah was wondering when she would have the opportunity to go looking for her mother again. I wonder if she knows how dangerous this doctor is. And then Leah saw that someone approached the water. "I should have guessed it was you," the guy said. "Hello, Camelius, are you enjoying some water? Is this the first time since Corsor? Will you let me join you?" Claude asked, unbuttoning his shirt. Leah, with horror, covering her chest under her shirt with her hands, asked if he was not hunting now. After all, he was in a suit and with a horse. Claude replied that he simply picked up the trail of an animal that was calmly walking around his hunting grounds. Leah immediately understood that he meant her. Mr. Claude warned Leas that he was hunting with His Majesty Prince Wade, so it would be better if he did not stumble upon him like this. So he asked Leas to stay in the same place until he lost sight of them. Leas thanked him for his concern. When the guys were already far away, Leah came out of the water. The girl looked at her reflection in the water and did not like that everything around her was a complete deception on her part. Prince Wade asked Claude where he had gone. He replied that he was lost, but Wade did not believe that this could happen to him. Then Wade asked Claude about the third attempt on his father's life, why the Grand Duke never said anything. Claude replied that the attempts had failed, and his father was unshakable. Claude said that Ian Sergio can no longer be in the Empire. Prince Wade recalled that he may be the only hope to end the centuries-old feud between Cayenne and Gaior. The guy thought about it. Lower Camillus, Ian Sergio all pointed to something hidden. Ian doesn't seem to care that Lias is a guy, but could he say that about himself? Wade asked why Claude couldn't take his eyes off the lake, as if he had lost a treasure there. The guy admitted that it was so. The prince immediately realized that Claude had fallen in love with someone, and Wade said that now it was his turn to suffer. Claude admitted that he was horrified by himself and felt incredibly disgusted. And he added, "The more you try to escape from the painful awareness, the more it will drag you down until you drown." Mrs. Marilyn and her friends discussed that the bandits who attacked her had been caught. Unfortunately, their leader is still at large. But it's only a matter of time before they are punished, now that Mr. Claude has joined the investigation. The ladies envied her that the Duke showed his concern. The girls noticed Camillus Bale next to Mrs. Anastasia. He looked very depressed. They told Marilyn that he had played an important role in catching the criminals. Then the guys entered the hall and the girls' eyes turned to them. Prince Wade greeted Princess Rosina and Mrs. Marilyn, and Kieran did the same. But not Claude. Marilyn noticed that he was not looking at her as she wanted, but at someone else. Camillus again. Claude didn't take his eyes off him. Leah went outside and sat down on a bench. She remembered Ms. Anastasia's words about how she expected her to return to Korsor immediately after Kieran's marriage ceremony. Leave the city quietly. Today, observe the nobles and remember how to behave at the meetings of the aristocrats. And if you want to become one of them, then you will have a choice, said the lady. Leah became sad again. Is it really a choice if she has to live like this for the rest of her life if she chooses to be a nobleman? Why did Anastasia offer her this? A guy approached Leas and called him. It was Lord Thorin. At this time at the banquet, Marilyn Shelby was talking with Mr. Claude about diamonds on neutral territory. Claude did not want to discuss this with her. His thoughts were occupied with other things. Therefore, he soon left her again, leaving her with his friends. They discussed that the map of Lower that Eddie Kirchman provided was incorrect. While talking, they did not notice that Claude had disappeared from their company. On the street, Thorin chased Leas and shouted that he knew he was the lady in the library. Laius asked if he really fell in love with her in the form of a girl. Finally, Laius told Thorin to challenge him to a duel if he wanted a showdown, because he is already tired of his constant nagging. And Leah turned to leave and bumped into Claude. He hugged Laius and asked Thorin what his problem was with Camillus. He replied that they were just talking, and he expects an apology for the insults. "How exactly did my brother insult you?" Kieran suddenly appeared. Leah decided to leave these squabbles to her older brother. And Claude, taking advantage of the fact that Kieran was distracted by Thorin, hugged Leas and asked if he was going to run away. Or he likes to be near his mistress. Leas replied that his presence would only complicate things. Claude said he is getting bolder every day. The brother noticed them and ordered Leas to go inside. "Claude, where did you go in the middle of the conversation? Were you looking for Camillus?" Kieran asked when he finished dealing with Thorin. Claude replied that he met him here by chance, but Kieran didn't believe it, saying it looked too suspicious to be just a coincidence. Claude replied that overprotection would not benefit anyone. "Aren't you the one who is overly protective of him?" Kieran asked Claude. Claude replied that his brother was as fragile as a sandcastle and someone needed to look after him. Anastasia sat in her bedroom and recalled how everyone praised Camillus at the banquet. But when someone said that the younger brother would surpass the elder, it made her very angry. "The older you get, the more like your mother you look. What should I do with your illegitimate daughter, Laura?" Mrs. Anastasia said to herself. A servant entered her room and told her that the Marquise's carriage had arrived at the imperial palace, and he returned in the company of His Highness, the Grand Duke. "Oh heavens, the mines are filled with diamonds of such excellent quality. It's no wonder that Gayor wants to take over neutral territories," His Majesty said, examining the diamond. He asked if they found out who owned these lands. "Not yet, Your Majesty," replied Maximilian del Ijar, Grand Duke, ruler of Del Casa. "However, it must be someone from the royal family. No aristocrat can have such large territories in his possession." Then His Majesty remembered that the son of the Marquis of Bale had brought a guest from the royal family of Gayor and asked where he was now. Bale replied that it was Prince Ian Sergio, and he can invite him to the marriage ceremony if necessary. They would like to call him now for a conversation, but it was already quite late. Then Maximilian was asked whether it was true that on the way here another attempt had been made on his life. He replied that he suspected Gayor's interference, but he also has many enemies in the empire who wish him death. His Majesty asked him to stay in the palace while it was too dangerous outside. Phoebe informed Leah that the Marquis and His Highness the Grand Duke arrived at the imperial palace late last night, and since rumors spread quickly, everyone knows about everything. She also knows that Marilyn Shelby proposed to Mr. Claude. In front of all the guests, she grabbed his sleeve and told him that she would visit the north. Leah wondered what this could mean. For example, the fact that Marilyn is waiting for an engagement date to be set. But why then did Claude say that they were not engaged? Phoebe praised the beauty of Monsieur Claude and asked if Leah had never looked closely at him. Leah replied that she had never thought about him in that way. A servant came into their room, brought Leos an envelope, and said that it was from a very well-dressed gentleman, who said that she would immediately understand who the letter was from. Also, he was wearing round glasses and had a strong antiseptic smell. Leah immediately understood who he was talking about. She opened the envelope. "Laura lost her daughter a long time ago, and I know her as the illegitimate son of the Marquis Gilliard Bale. Did this interest you enough for a meeting, madam?" Lady Anastasia and Marquis Gilliard stood in confusion when they heard Prince Ian Sergio's proposal. He repeated, "I want to officially declare your daughter a bride." They pretended they didn't understand what he was talking about, but Prince Ian said that they really thought that he would fall for this farce that Leah was a man. The Marquis said that this was quite unexpected, and asked if he wanted to take Camellia as his wife now. Ian replied that not right now, but he needed guarantees. "With your permission, I would like her to make her debut next year. Before the wedding, she must return to her true identity," the prince told them. The lady replied that Camillus wants a quiet and peaceful life. The emperor wishes to obtain a trade agreement with Gayor. Therefore, Anastasia suggested that it would be better if he chose one of the princesses, but the prince replied that he only needed Camellia. Gilliard asked what would happen if Leah didn't want it. After all, she lived here all her life as a boy. Ian then replied that he would do his best to change her mind. Ian said he would take their silence as agreement, and Gilliard informed him that His Majesty, the Emperor, wanted to meet him in person. The prince was surprised. Vale said that the Emperor was convinced that ownership of the neutral territory was in the hands of the Gayor aristocracy. Therefore, the Marquis asked Ian to accept the invitation. "My daughter's engagement will be discussed after we meet with His Majesty," Gilliard said. But Kieran jumped to his feet. He told his father that there was no need to ask the prince about the owner of the neutral territories. After all, the true owner is right in front of them, Ian Sergio. Kieran then called to Ian to follow him into the corridor. Ian asked him why this belated anger. After all, he had known for a long time that he was in love with his sister. Kieran replied that Camellia was still too young, and that's not why he told him the truth. Ian replied that Kieran did it for his own peace of mind, because he also had a hand in creating this illusion of life. Kieran said that he was right, and therefore he would try to do everything to atone for his guilt and give Leah freedom. Vale believed that Leah's marriage to Gayora would be like a golden cage for her. Everything she enjoyed while living as a man will be unavailable to her as soon as she puts on a dress. Kieran said that Ian would be the one to take away her freedom. Then the prince replied that at least she would be alive. Bale did not understand his hints and asked what he meant. "You disappoint me, Kieran. You are naive if you believe that your charming mother will allow her to live. Don't worry, she'll be as free as a bird next to me," Ian replied. Prince Ian told Kieran that he might think him smug, but he loved Camellia. Then Kieran called him crazy, and Ian replied that it was. But there is someone crazier than him. And he is next to Camellia again, and Kieran doesn't even know about it. Claude was informed that the attacker had cut his own throat before they could extract any information from him. Since the killer chose death over revealing information, then there is definitely no ordinary person behind this, Claude told his father. Claude did not understand how his father could remain so calm. After all, this was the third attempt on his life. Maximum replied that he had grown up to be a worthy replacement. If this is how I should inherit the title, then I refuse for at least the next 10 years, the son replied. Claude noticed that Dad looked tired. He replied that he had no reason to worry and promised him that everything would be fine. And he added that he would stay with him as long as possible. As Claude sat under the tree in the garden, he thought that if it turned out that Gayor was behind the assassination attempts, a war would begin. And this prince, who is called a war fanatic, must have a reason why he remains in the Empire. Is it possible that he has an ally here? Suddenly, Prince Ian appeared from behind a tree and said that he was curious who was sitting here. Then Claude asked why he was here. Ian replied that he wanted to see Camillus, but he was still in class. Then Claude clarified why he was in the Empire. Ian replied, in order to get a lot. Claude asked directly if Gayor was behind the assassination attempts on his father, and if he doesn't stop, then a war will begin. The prince replied that, on the contrary, there would be no war, because soon their states Cayenne and Gayor will become allies through a marriage alliance. Claude did not want to believe what he heard and asked who he was talking about. But Ian said it was a secret. The more you value something, the more carefully you have to hide it, the prince added. And leaving, he asked Claude to tell Camillus that he was here. When Ian left, Claude thought, everyone has known for a long time that the prince likes Camillus. However, marriage. What the hell is he thinking about? A few days later in the Imperial Library, Lady Anastasia approached Laius and informed him that she did not want him to attend Kieran's betrothal ceremony. Leah replied that her brother would be very upset. Then she sat clutching the letter and thought about how security around Lower was still tight. And the celebration of my brother's engagement will end in a week. She'll have to try again later, she thought, reading the letter and looking out the window. Suddenly, Monsieur Claude, the young duke, entered her library. He said that he noticed Camillus and came. Claude asked why he was still here. Laius replied that he was not feeling very well. Then Claude offered to take him to the hospital or to the Imperial Palace. But Laius refused. Then Claude said that he also had no reason to leave. Rather than go to a boring ceremony, I would prefer to stay here with you, Claude told him, sitting next to him on the sofa. But Laius objected that he could not go to the ceremony, as Kieran would be very upset. Claude replied that he doubted that he would notice his absence in a room full of guests. Leah thought that Claude is not without responsibility, but sometimes he behaves so childishly. But suddenly he became serious and admitted that his father was attacked again. And he thought about what he should do first when he researched the title. Claude decided that he had to gather people around him whom he could trust. After all, he will manage the estate and with their help strengthen his position. Leah thought that this was the second time he had mentioned having her work on his estate. Monsieur Claude asked if he would really refuse him a second time. Laius replied that, as he had already said, he wanted to do something, and soon he would leave this place in search of his own life. Then Claude asked if he had already decided what he wanted to do. Laius replied that he wanted to be a teacher and teach children. There are children on the estate who need training. You yourself asked me about this, so he asked me to shelter these children. However, he never bothered to visit them, Claude said with offense. Leah was surprised by his action. Mr. Claude, I think you really are a good person, said Laius. Claude wanted to confess something to him, but they heard a voice they knew. It was Marilyn Shelby who ordered to find Monsieur Claude, who had entered the library. Claude hugged Laius, pressing him against the bookcase. He said that he only needed to remain like this for a minute, and he would not be exposed. And Lady Shelby will think that he is dating someone and will finally give in. When the servant found them and called the young duke, Claude told him to leave because he was busy. Marilyn was outraged by this behavior of her fiancé. Laius told Claude that he could just let her see them together. He shouldn't have hurt her like that. Claude didn't understand why Laius was so worried. Then Laius said that Marilyn must be in great pain because she is in love with him. To this, Claude asked, if Marilyn is in love with him, then who is he in love with? Leah decided to answer that she didn't know. And I thought, Does the young Duke really like men? Or he realized that she was actually a girl, and she decided to tell him again. "Mr. Claude, I am a man," said Leah. "Right. If you are a man, then you are a man. I know this very well, so there is no need to explain anything," Claude replied. Claude invited Leas to go with him to the place where they could secretly observe the engagement. When they got there, Leas was delighted. He did not know that such a place existed in the palace. This was the room on the top floor where Claude, Kieran, and Rosina played as children. Then it seemed that not a single living soul knew about this place. Then Leas asked if it was normal that he was here now. Claude replied that he was always welcome and said that now it was time for him to go to the ceremony so as not to upset his brother. As Leah watched the ceremony from the window, Claude approached Kieran and Rosina and told his friend that he had a gift and asked him to look up. There he saw Leas, who waved to him and congratulated him on his engagement. The brother and sister were happy that they were able to share this important day together thanks to their friend. In the evening, when the fireworks were set off, Leah watched them from the room, and Marilyn was looking for Claude on the street and remembered that unpleasant moment when her fiancé hugged another in the library. She thought that all men were like this, but not him. At some point, the girl raised her head and saw Camillus in the window. His blonde hair haunted her, the same as in the library. Laius thanked Claude for the food, praising the cook in the imperial palace. Claude stood up from the table and said that he would be back soon. He wanted to get something to drink. When Claude left, Leah noticed a large chest with toys in the corner. She thought it was cute that Monsieur Claude was still playing with them. She thought he was an adorable child. The door creaked and she thought it was Monsieur Claude who had returned. "I knew it was you," Marilyn told Shelby as she entered the room. "What are you doing here?" she asked. At this time, Claude was walking with a bottle of wine along the castle corridor. Prince Ian called out to him, asking where Laius was. Claude replied that he did not expect to see him here. The prince said that the purpose of his stay here was for the engagement, but he did not even have time to see Kieran properly, since their emperor did not let him go for a minute. Ian again repeated his question where Camillus was. Claude replied that he could look for it himself if he wanted. But suddenly, they heard the voices of Laius and Marilyn Shelby, and hurried upstairs. Laius asked Marilyn what came over her. She replied that earlier in the Imperial Library with Claude it was him, but Laius claimed that he was in this room all the time. The girl said something was strange from the very beginning. As soon as he appeared in the palace, Claude changed. Laius said that he did not understand what she was talking about. Then Marilyn began to unbutton his shirt and ask him to prove to her that he was a guy and she was wrong. Laius pushed her onto the bed to calm her down. Laius said he didn't know what caused her misunderstanding, but her fears will never come true. When Laius let go, she hit him in the face. Marilyn said that no matter who he was, as long as he was Camillus Bale, he should act like a man. And since he is a guy, he should not encroach on what belongs to women. When Claude entered the room and asked what was going on, Marilyn admitted that she wanted to make sure that Camillus was really a man and tried to undress him. And Mr. Camillus misinterpreted her intentions and threw her onto the bed. And she was so shocked by this that she removed it across her face. Claude said her blow left its mark, and he does not intend to leave everything as it is. For causing pain to someone who belongs to him, he will have to pay a very high price. Prince Ian intervened and asked what kind of absurdity was this. Had the Duke really fallen for this cheap show? And in Gaiora they have severe punishments for libel. You can lose your tongue and hands, and then arrest. When Claude and Laius were alone in the room, Laius asked for forgiveness for what happened. But he didn't want to do anything shameful to Lady Shelby. "You are the one who was hit by Marilyn and you did nothing to apologize for. Actually, I'm the one who wants to apologize for what I'm about to do right now," Claude said. Claude said that whether he was a man or a woman no longer mattered. The guy stroked Leah's face with his hand and kissed her on the lips, hugging her on the bed. "Mr. Claude, so you like men?" asked Laius, and tears appeared on his cheeks. "Camillus, don't cry, Claude didn't have time to finish when they entered their room. "The Grand Duke is in critical condition," Monsieur Claude was told. His father sat on the bed and coughed up blood. His Majesty was informed that it was poison, and his cup was saturated with it. When Claude entered the room, his father called him to him. "From now on, the young Duke Claude Delihar, you are now the Grand Duke Claude Delihar," his father told Claude, lying in his bed. Leah watched as Maximilian Delijar died. and Prince Ian turned to her that he needed to return to Gyor right now and asked if she would go with him. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. Then Ian said that he did not know that his brother was stupid enough to add poison. Maybe someone else did it. But from now on, the situation will definitely become more complicated. So he offers her to go with him. No, she's not going anywhere, Ian, Kieran told the prince. However, he had to quickly get to a safe place, because what was done tonight will lead to war. Ian kissed Leah's hand and said that he would come back for her. Claude informed the emperor that this was the work of the Marquis of Shelby. His Majesty did not understand, because the Marquis was loyal to the imperial family. And what benefit could he derive from the conspiracy with Gyor? When the emperor asked if he was planning to marry the Marquis's daughter, Claude replied that the Marquis of Shelby was the only person who delivered tea to the imperial palace, and he is extremely scrupulous about checking the goods. The tea leaves from which the tea was brewed were also delivered by him. Perhaps the target was the imperial family and not his father. Plus, Prince Ian has disappeared. His escort was detained but committed suicide by biting off his tongue. The emperor was shocked that Gyor managed to reach the very heart of the empire. Claude then informed His Majesty that he was going to take advantage of the situation and return the neutral territories to imperial control. Therefore, Monsieur Claude, now Grand Duke of Delcasa, asks permission of His Majesty the Emperor to declare war on Gyor. At this time, in the corridor of the palace, Kieran called Leah and said that it was not safe here now, and she should go back to that secret room. Leah asked her brother if it was true that Ian was behind all this. Kieran replied that they did not know yet, but certainly not himself personally. And it will be difficult for Duke Claude to survive tonight. Camelia, do you share the feelings of the young Duke? Leah's brother asked. He remembered how 2 years ago Claude stood on the street and looked at the snow. He then said that the snow brought back memories for him and asked what it tasted like. Suddenly, Mrs. Anastasia came up to them and told Leus that she was very disappointed. After all, she told him not to come here, and he dared to ignore her words. Then Kieran stood up for his brother, saying that it was he who asked him to come to the holiday. Anastasia told Kieran to return to Princess Rosina, since this concerns only her and Camillus. Kieran countered that now was not the time for arguments, and his mother told him not to defend so much a person who is not even his brother. Kieran asked Leah to go to the room and wait for him there. The mother was offended that Kieran had allowed meaningless affection to cloud his judgment, and she said that he doesn't care about his poor mother at all. And Kieran asked, "Tell me, mother, on that day when I was abandoned on the shore of the cold lake, whoever is responsible for this, is it really Leah's mother?" "Madame Anastasia, what does he mean?" And the son replied that his mother knew best what he was talking about, and they dispersed on different sides of the corridor. Leah sat on the bed in the room and thought only about whether Mr. Claude was okay. Receive such news at such a moment. Someone came into her room and she thought it was her brother, but it turned out to be Mr. Claude. He said he was looking for Leus, but he objected that the Duke's well-being was more important now. But Claude hugged Leus and said that he would rest a little, standing like that with him in his arms. Leah hugged him and told him everything would be okay. The venerable Grand Duke of the North is dead. The ruler of Delcasa had changed, and people believed that he would raise the sword to destroy his enemies. The shadow of war hung over the empire. Standing at the window, Leah thought, if what my brother said is true, then the war will begin very soon. So we won't be able to see each other anymore. Watching from the window, she saw a man with glasses whom she recognized. It was the imperial tailor. He knew her secret. But what brought him here? Laius ran out to meet him. Mr. Frank greeted him and said that they had not seen each other since he sewed his uniform for the academy. But Frank noticed that Laius didn't look very good, and he said that the life of an aristocrat is not at all as simple as it might seem at first glance. Leah thought that she was the only person in the imperial palace who knew her true identity, and she should thank him for keeping her secret. She thanked Mr. Taylor, and he said that he had to give her something and handed her an envelope. She realized that this was the person who wrote to her. Frank said that he had not received a response to his last letter, and therefore came in person. Leah will find a map in the envelope, and it will lead to the person she is looking for. But he warned that this is a very dangerous place and not for those who are ill-prepared. Therefore, I asked her to open the envelope when she was ready. There are rumors that Marcus Bale is also looking for her. Last time I kept your secret, so this time it's time for you to keep mine. I will trust you, my lady. The man said goodbye. I was surprised by your sudden visit. Did something happen? The father asked Lias. Lias said he heard that he was leaving to join the war effort. Gilliard replied that he intended to join Grand Duke Claude, and lately he hardly sleeps because he is saddened by the death of his close friend. Then Leah said, "Father, I think it's time to stop all this." Her father didn't understand, but she explained what it meant to stop living like Camillus Bale. Her father asked if she had found her mother, Laura, and Leah asked after all he was also looking for her. Gilliard replied that Laura had been good at playing hide-and-seek since childhood. Since childhood? Wasn't Mom a maid in Bale's house? The father replied that he was too tired, so Leah should return to his place. I still can't believe that my mother is to blame for what happened to my brother, Leah admitted. Gilliard said he would think about her words. Walking down the corridor, Leah couldn't understand why she had never heard that her mom and dad had known each other since childhood. Behind her was a servant who called her. He asked if she planned to accept Prince Georg's marriage proposal. Leah asked what he meant. She told her that Ian Sergio had officially asked for her hand in marriage. Leah replied that this was the first time she had heard about this, and she remembered Ian's parting words about the fact that he would come back for her, and that she would wait for him. The servant said that he was glad that she was not delighted with this proposal. After all, the Marquis is worried that Lias will agree and leave for Gayor, and the royal family of Gaiora are persistent and ruthless, and the same blood flows in the veins of His Highness Ian, the servant continued. I am well aware that the prince is the benefactor of Mr. Kieran, and as a butler I have no right to speak carelessly about my master's friends. However, these are people with a bloodthirsty nature, which undoubtedly cannot be trusted unreservedly. The butler asked Lias not to go to Gayor, even for the sake of the prospect of a brief truce. Walking down the corridor to her room, Leah thought about Ian, whether he had been serious all this time. And if war starts, they will never see each other again. When Leah entered her room, she saw a man there. You're late as always, Claude told her. Hello, Camillus, long time no see, he said, smiling. Lias asked in surprise what brought him here, and wasn't he supposed to go north? Claude replied that he had something to say before leaving. Camillus, I am here to apologize for what happened in that room. A frivolous act committed in a fit of fleeting curiosity. I did something I shouldn't have. Leah didn't want to believe what she was saying, but Claude asked to forget about what was very impolite and indecent. Leah couldn't forget about it, because for her it was like a dream come true. At that moment, she felt that she was in the arms of someone who accepted her as she was. Leah's tears flowed from this injustice. Claude noticed that Lias was not feeling well and asked where his maid was. After all, he has a fever. But Lias replied that there was enough concern and asked Monsieur Claude to leave his room. Leah was sad at the window and thought how stupid she was. Claude met the maid Pippi on the street near the house and ordered her to quickly go to her master, who seemed to have a fever. As he sat in his car, he thought about what he wanted to tell Lias, that he only liked him, not men. Why then did he look as if he was ready to cry at any moment? The guy asked the driver how much time they still had. He replied that about a couple of hours. Then Claude decided to stay here for a while. When Pippi left Leah's room, Monsieur Claude was standing in the corridor. He asked her how Camillus was feeling. The maid replied that he took the medicine and fell asleep. Monsieur Claude said that he would visit him briefly before leaving, and entered the room. Pippi thought that Monsieur Claude was really not indifferent to his mistress. Claude sat next to him on the bed and thought that they would not see each other for many years. He wondered if Lias would miss him even a little. Leah said, Pippi, it's so hot, and opened up, throwing off the blanket. Claude thought with a smile, Lias, as always, you won't please. He glanced at Lias and saw breasts under his unbuttoned shirt. What does all of this mean, Kieran? So that means he was fooling me from the very beginning, Mr. Claude realized. Prince Wade and Grand Duke Claude sat on horseback in front of Prince Ian's camp. Wade noticed that Claude wasn't wearing his clematis brooch today. The Claude he knew would never trade the expensive heirloom for the Duchess's future. Or perhaps it's already on the bride-to-be's chest. Wade wondered if it was Marilyn Shelby and he had finally accepted her as his betrothed. But he would not be surprised by this, because people before the war are prone to sentimentality. Or is this the same nightmare that you said you fell in love with? Asked the prince. Claude replied that this was the girl to whom he left the brooch as a reminder that her heart belonged to him. And that is why defeat is unacceptable for him. Too much is at stake. Wade said that these are good words and let them bring them an easy victory. The prince decided it was time to start. "Forward, sons of Cayenne, attack!" Prince Wade shouted, and the army galloped towards the enemy camp. "I will return to you alive, and when this happens, I will return your name, your life, and you will be mine, Camellia," Claude said. Leah asked Pippi if Mr. Claude was here in the room. The maid replied that he visited her, and it seemed that he was not indifferent to her. Pippi realized that Leah was worried that he might have seen something, and reassured her that he left the room sullen as usual. And besides, he would interrogate all the servants if he saw anything unusual. Leah thought Pippi was right. Suddenly, Pippi noticed a brooch. "This is the clematis brooch belonging to the house of Ihar, lady. Do you think he left it for you?" Pippi asked with enthusiasm. Leah took the brooch in her hands but said that she doubted that he left it on purpose. She thought he had dropped it in a hurry and decided to keep an eye on it until he returned. The girl thought that as soon as she recovered, she would continue searching for her mother. I wonder if she will be able to give the brooch to Monsieur Claude. After all, she may have to leave the estate if she finds her. Or maybe she should wait for him to return first. What am I thinking about? It's too late to change anything. I've already decided to leave Camellia Spale behind. I have to find my mom. Somewhere there she is waiting for me, I'm sure. Leah firmly decided.